Rabbits. Cute little guys at first glance, but bloodthirsty killers when you peel back the facade. Rabbits are portrayed as demonic entities in everything from creepypastas to Five Nights at Freddy's. And so, with today being Easter Sunday, we're going to cover multiple stories and instances of demonic rabbits in media and on the internet. There may be some subject matter not for the faint of heart, so viewer discretion is advised. But I know what you're thinking. Bowtie, it's April. Are you seriously sticking to the Halloween vibes still? Well, yes, I am. Now, as you can tell, I've been on a spooky kick lately, and I've been watching and listening to many different spooky and creepy YouTubers, such as Nick Crowley, Nightmind, Dark Somnium, Mr. Creeps, Lazy Masquerade, and most notably of all, Nexpo. Nick Crowley, Nexpo, and Lazy Masquerade cover dark and creepy moments from the internet and real-life events. Nightmind covers unfiction projects and internet ARGs, and Dark Somnium and Mr. Creeps cover creepypastas and cryptid-type stories. So I'll leave the links in the description to all of their channels. Nexpo also recently launched a podcast. Definitely go check that out. If you like this type of content, I highly suggest you go check them out. And given the subject matter for today, and how Nexpo has been my recent binge channel, I think it's only fitting that, as a fan, and in an act of parasocial love for his content, we give this episode the Nexpo treatment. Roll intro. The first story I found while browsing the web, written by Sherman Smith. This is, Have You Ever Been to Bunnyman Bridge? Dude, have you ever heard of Bunnyman Bridge? I've been living in Virginia for less than 6 months when my buddy Scott asked me this question. I was a recent transplant from New Jersey and had no idea what he was talking about. We were sitting on the lawn outside of the house we rented together, tossing back beers in the brisk evening air. No, I said. What's that? Well, back in the 70s, some kids were out by this bridge in Clifton, right? They parked near this bridge, underpass thing. Looking to bang, I guess. Guy and a girl. Anyway, they park, and before they can even turn off the car, Scott's left fist smacked into his right palm. Bam. Window shattered. Crazy dude dressed like a bunny, full bunny suit, ears and all, standing there, hatchet in hand. He had smashed out their window. Warns them to leave and never come back. They haul ass out of there, right? Tell the cops the psycho threw the hatchet at them or something because they had it with them. Cops never found anything. They'd find corpses out there like every year after that. That's crazy, I said. It sounded tame compared to the stories we were told and retold growing up. New Jersey is a messed up place. That was Halloween night. If you go out there on Halloween, the Bunnyman comes out and tries to chop you up. No, Scott. I finished my beer and put the empty can down on the dewy grass. We're not going out there. We're going out there, he said, completely ignoring me. We gotta, it's awesome, I sighed. You can't talk Scott out of doing stupid things. Ask any of the emergency room doctors that had stitched his ass back together over the years. Fine, we'll go. Scott was like a kid on Christmas Eve. It was 2 weeks before Halloween, and I figured he'd get drunk and forget all about it. I was wrong. Halloween crept up on me, and that entire day, Scott wouldn't stop going on and on about our trip to Bunnyman Bridge. He filled the gas tank in his Jeep, bought snacks, even paid for some decent weed to smoke on the way out there. At this point, I'd be a dick to say no, so off we went. The drive from Norfolk to Clifton took a little over 3.5 hours. We were going way out there. It's a tiny place. Lots of historical significance. Not even 300 people living there full time. The bridge was outside of town, on a back road near some old homes. I didn't believe for a minute that a crazy killer in a bunny costume would be wandering around at midnight. It had been almost 45 years since the first story popped up, but I do believe in being prepared. I'd been in the habit of carrying a small pistol with me everywhere I went since moving to the state. I wasn't stupid enough to leave it home. We weren't trespassing, so I wasn't afraid of getting in trouble. I have my concealed carry permit. Better safe than sorry, right? We rolled through the old town before midnight and made our way to the outskirts. During the day, I'm sure it would be a beautiful place to visit. Old churches, a steam locomotive parked on the tracks, a true throwback to the idyllic Americana of 60 years ago. At night, the tall peaks of the buildings cast odd, angular shadows against the ground, elongated by the light of the full moon. There were no street lamps, or any kind of electric light. Most of the buildings we passed were dark. Once we drove through town and onto the back roads, it was even worse. Dense treetops bowed out over the road, blocking the moon for the majority of the drive. The headlights fought to pierce the thick fog covering the roadway. Scott couldn't have picked a better night to come out here. I'm not easy to scare, but my palms were starting to sweat a little. The hair on my forearms was on end, sending tiny pinpricks of electricity up my spine every time they brushed the interior of the car. Despite the balmy weather, I felt a chill creep along my skin. We rode in silence for the better part of the trip, before Scott pulled over and parked. He turned to face me, looked me in the eye, and grinned. "We're here." Without breaking eye contact, he killed the headlights and turned off the engine. The world descended into darkness, an inky black nothing that swallowed us up. Without the thrum of the old Jeep's engine, it was as quiet as a grave. The sudden silence left my ears ringing. So we drove all the way out here. Now what? I looked out the window, squinting, trying to see. The scant moonlight that cut through the canopy of leaves didn't illuminate much. We walked to the bridge. Scott didn't wait for me to respond. He got out of the car and closed his door. He began walking down the road, not looking back. I wasn't about to let him wander off without me. Scott is a disaster waiting to happen, and I didn't feel like spending my evening with him in the ER again. I jumped out of the Jeep and followed him. The road meandered through the thick trees for a few hundred yards before coming to a tight curve. We walked through the still night, side by side. Rounding the bend in the road, we reached an area where the tree cover was thinner and the moonlight broke through. The road narrowed into a concrete tube cutting through a small raised embankment. It was too dark to see the top of the elevated roadway. In the waning moonlight, the tunnel was little more than a yawning black opening, flanked in pale gray concrete. "Bunnyman Bridge," Scott said with a sense of triumph in his voice. He took out his phone and turned to face me. Leave it to this idiot to take a selfie at a time like this, I thought. He made a stupid face, moved the phone around to line up the photo, and pressed the screen. As he did, I noticed movement near the tunnel. At first, I thought I was seeing things, but then I saw it again. From the bushes on the side of the structure, a tall, white form emerged. Scott saw the look on my face and spun around, phone in hand. The flashlight on his iPhone came on and lit up the roadway. Standing there, in front of the gaping black maw of the underpass, was a man in a bunny suit. Well over 6 feet tall and gangly, all limbs and no mass. There was a yellow and red fire axe gripped in his hands. The long, slender ears of the bunny suit swayed behind him as he slowly made his way toward us. Dark patches stained the front of his suit. I didn't need to stretch my imagination to figure out what it was. Blood. Scott stammered and backpedaled into me. Without thinking, I reached behind me and removed my compact pistol from its holster. I pointed the gun at the approaching form and leveled the tritium sights on center mass. "Back the fuck up!" I tried to sound commanding, but even I could hear the warble in my voice. "I'll fucking shoot you, swear to God." "Leave," he said. The bunnyman didn't stop. He continued moving towards us, closing the gap. The axe swayed back and forth in front of him, and as he neared, I could see there was blood on the blade. I told myself to be rational. This was obviously a guy playing a prank on Halloween. He was trying to scare some idiots who came to see the bridge. But most people would drop that shit in a heartbeat when there was a loaded gun pointed at them. He kept coming. The movement was slow, but he kept pacing towards us. I couldn't see his face in the deep shadows, but I could tell, I knew, that he was staring me in the eye. He pivoted and ran, full bore, towards Scott. I didn't hesitate. I exhaled, released my arms, and squeezed the trigger gently. The recoil shook my already strained muscles. The bunnyman staggered, slowed, and slumped down into the roadway. He had only moved a few dozen feet from the mouth of the tunnel to where he now sat. The scent of cordite tainted the cool night air. Crimson oozed from the front of his suit and joined the darker brown patch already there. The axe slipped from his grip, making a dull clunk on the asphalt. Scott stammered, mouth moving like a dying fish. He turned and ran back toward the Jeep. I kept the gun trained on the man and approached with caution. The bullet had struck him in the chest, but not in the heart. Still, I was sure he wasn't going to last long. I moved to the side, kicking the axe away from him. "Scott, call the police!" I yelled. He didn't respond. I let go of the gun with my left hand and reached for my phone. My right hand, still holding my pistol, betrayed my frayed nerves. It vibrated at the end of my arm. The man coughed and sputtered, blood splattering from his lips. "Please," he choked out. He reached for his midsection. I assumed he was going to press his hand to the wound, but it disappeared into a pouch on the front of the bunny suit. I hadn't noticed it due to the huge dark smear across the front. His hand came out holding a furry black object. A rabbit, neck broken and head hanging limply to the side. He reached his arm as far forward as he could, which wasn't far, and tried to fling it to his side, back toward the tunnel opening. It landed 2 feet away with a sickening thud. He looked me in the eye. For the first time, I really took in his features. He was young, my age, younger even. Clean cut. I don't know what I was expecting. Crazy eyes, maybe? Homeless drifter meth mouth? I'm not sure, but it wasn't this. "Please." He coughed out again, motioning towards the rabbit. He opened his mouth to speak, but all that came out was a pained cry, followed by a wheezing, gurgling sound. I had hit him in the lung. I stared at the rabbit, trying to understand the situation. I was in shock, looking back on it. You never know how you're going to react to the fucked up situations life throws at you until you're there. That was the first time I paid attention to my surroundings since I initially saw him. The moon had shifted, and I could see the opening of the tunnel now, and the large, black fingers splayed on either side of the concrete. The opening was at least 12 feet wide, and somehow these hands were grabbing both sides at once. Hands that had to be a foot long easy. 2 tiny red orbs danced in the darkness, the light refracting and giving them an odd pale glow. That's when I first heard the scratching. Slow, like the labored dragging of heavy furniture across an ancient wooden floor, followed by a ticking, tapping sound. The Bunnyman heard it too. His eyes grew wide, his mouth trembling. He attempted to speak again, but all that came out was that wet, rattling cough. He fell over, trying to reach for the rabbit. I'm not sure why I didn't run for the Jeep. I sincerely wish I had. Phone and gun forgotten, I'd grabbed the rabbit carcass. It was still warm. I threw it with everything I had left in me into the dark opening. The silence grew palpable, and the tapered shadow fingers retreated into the tunnel. I heard a sickening crunch. The dragging started again, retreating into the depths of the darkness. I looked at the Bunnyman, laying on the ground, laboring to breathe. His face relaxed, and he smiled. His unfocused eyes locked on mine, and he looked relieved. "Your problem," he said, then laughed. The laugh turned into a gurgling, choking noise. And then he laid still. I walked to Scott's truck and found him curled up on the floor in the back seat, crying. I regained my senses enough to call the police at this point. They came out, took our statements and my pistol. They held us for a while. The Bunnyman was a student who had been living in the area. We didn't find out much else. They found 2 more dead bunnies in the pocket of his outfit. They determined I had fired in self-defense, and I wasn't charged with any crime. Scott never asked to go to the Bunnyman Bridge again. He moved out a few months later, and I haven't spoken to him since. Time went by. My therapist told me that I imagined the thing in the tunnel, that it was my way of coping with killing a man who intended to do harm to me and my friend. I began to believe it. October came again, and Halloween passed without incident. I was curious, though, about why I never heard anyone talk about the real Bunnyman after what happened. You'd think that would add to the legend, but I never saw it mentioned anywhere online or in the news. I was reading a forum post about local Virginia legends when the Bunnyman Bridge came up. Most people regurgitated the same old tales about escaped convicts and supernatural rabbits, but one person posted something that chilled my blood. They found another corpse this year, eaten. Hadn't happened in 5, maybe 6 years. The Bunnyman must be gone. Cold crept up my spine. The Bunnyman must be gone. I could hear the sickening crunch of that thing eating the rabbit. Corpses. Eaten. Your problem. It took me a while to come to terms with what happened. I spent the better part of this year driving to Clifton and walking through the tunnel during the day. I wanted to know every inch of that road before October. Nobody is going to die this year. I've already purchased a bunny suit and an axe. I'm not sure where to get rabbits from, but I have time. It's only August after all. Now, wasn't that spooky? I love the creepiness, the subversion of expectations with the Bunnyman reveal, and I love the good supernatural twist as well. Plus, I got to flex some of my acting with this story. 10 out of 10. But let me know your thoughts on the story in the comments. Now, a dark supernatural entity connected to bunnies reminds me of Shirotabi from the anime Ghost Stories. Don't watch the English dub with your kids, folks. If you know, you know. Anyway, the anime follows a group of grade school students fighting against supernatural forces. One point in the anime, a student uses black magic to bring back her dead rabbit. But in doing so, the rabbit, Shirotabi, is cursed and transforms into a killer demon every night. I couldn't find any specific legend that it's based off of, as some other Japanese legends show up in the show, but this may be just an average yokai possession. In Japan, a yokai is a broad term for various supernatural beings, which includes demons, ghosts, and shapeshifters. Moving on to the next story I wish to highlight today, also found on the web, Rabbits in the Creek. Now, I couldn't find any credited author for this one, so if you happen to know, please let me know in the comments so I can properly credit them. For now, though, on to the story. I'm writing this because my family won't talk about it anymore. I'm the only one who can't seem to forget. I was raised on the outskirts of Preston, a small town in southern Idaho with a population of around 5,000. My more immediate community was an isolated, dead-end dirt road called Bear Creek. Less than 20 families lived on the Bear Creek. I didn't mind being so isolated. I grew up in the comfort of wide fields and close neighbors that only rural people know. We were a Mormon community, very church-centered, very community-centered. All the young girls, myself included, were part of the young women's group, and all the boys were members of the local Boy Scout troop, which doubled as a church group in our area. We had 4th of July parties at the local ballpark and swam in the nearby reservoir. It was a good, quiet community. My house, a 92-year-old farmhouse built by my great-great-grandfather, was situated on a small hill surrounded by a wide grass field on one side and a snaking dirt road on the other. Across the road was the creek bottoms. Southern Idaho is categorized in a desert climate, so not much grows outside of the irrigated fields besides sagebrush and burrs. The creek bottoms were the exception. The creek fed the growth of a thick tangle of pussy willow bushes. In the late fall, we used to go down into the bottoms and pick the white cottony pussy willow seeds to decorate the fences of our driveway. Being so isolated, it wasn't uncommon for animals to come down from the mountains. We had a female moose who brought her calf down and lived in our orchard every winter, and the occasional lion wasn't unheard of either. The summer when I turned 8, I remember because it was the same year as my baptism. A smaller mountain lion was spotted several times in our area. We weren't worried. The big cats stayed away from the farms and usually moved on when the area didn't yield enough food. The same summer, my neighbor Peyton was working on his Eagle Scout project. He loved National Geographic and thought it would be pretty cool to try putting together a National Geographic submission on our little creek bottoms. The young lion that happened to be in our area at the same time made him especially excited. He decided he wanted to try to get pictures of the lion, and he emailed the National Geographic team for advice. They recommended setting up an automatic camera that takes shots every couple seconds in an area the lion was known to visit. They also recommended setting some kind of bait so the lion was more likely to come by. No one in the creek liked the idea of live bait or carrion, so we came up with a different kind of bait. We decided to set up an audio recording of a dying rabbit and play it on a loop through a set of speakers hidden in the willows. I remember when everyone was down in the bottoms testing the speakers, and I heard the noise for the first time. The sound of a dying rabbit is horrible. It's been described as being almost identical to the sound of a screaming child. If you've never heard it yourself, there's plenty of recordings available online. It's worth a listen. The camera was set up, the speakers were set up, everything was perfect. Peyton explained that he would allow the camera and recording to play uninterrupted for a week, and then he would go check on it. This would give time for our scent to fade from the bottoms and encourage the lion to come closer. At first I was worried about the noise. It was a truly horrible noise, and our house was the closest to the setup point in the bottoms. My father assured me that the noise wouldn't reach as far as our house, and I was relieved when we arrived home that night, and he was correct. The bottoms were far enough away that I couldn't hear anything. I remember Peyton the next day at church. He was fidgety and excited to check on the equipment, but he had to wait a week, which everybody kept reminding him. He couldn't risk going down too early and scaring the lion away for good. That night I woke up to an awful noise. I sat ramrod straight in my bed with my eyes wide in the dark, hands clutched so hard my palms bore the indent of my fingernails for hours after. I knew that noise. It was the recording of the rabbit. It sounded faint and far off, like it really could have been coming from the bottoms. But that was impossible, because the recording had been going all night the previous day and I hadn't heard a thing. I didn't sleep that night. I was too scared to get out of bed and wake my parents. The recording played over and over again. I had the loop memorized. In the morning, I stumbled into the kitchen for breakfast. My mom and dad were sitting at the kitchen table. They too had dark rings under their eyes. I hadn't been the only one who'd heard it. Mom was convinced that the equipment must have been broken. She wanted to go down into the bottoms to check it out. Dad refused. He was a kind, gentle man and didn't want to stir up any unnecessary drama. He was sure there had been a strong wind last night, and the wind was carrying the noise farther than its natural reach. He told us to listen. We did. He was right. We couldn't hear it now. We forgot about it and went about our daily goings. The next night, it happened again. I stayed up in my bed with my back to the wall. The screaming was even louder than before, but this time something was different. It was lower pitched than I remember, and parts of the loop were slowed down, as if the recording were warped in places. At times the loop did not loop naturally and instead picked up at a random place in the middle. My mom didn't mention anything at the breakfast table, but both her and my dad seemed tense. The third night, I mustered the courage to stand beside my bedroom window and look out into the yard. For a moment I stood, rooted to the spot, my hands shaking no matter how hard I clenched them. The noise sidled in through the cracks in the window. I watched the outline of the trees in the yard, perfectly still. Not even the slightest breeze stirred their branches. My mom announced that she would be going to visit her sisters in town the next day, and would probably spend the night there. She invited me to come along, but I was a daddy's girl at heart, and chose to stay at the farm. I took Mom's place beside Dad in their bed that night, but even that didn't help. I don't think my dad was asleep either, for he was unnaturally still the whole night. We began to hear the noise during the day, too. I was drawing with chalk on the sidewalk when it happened. My shoulders tensed and the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. There was only one scream, a short, high-pitched one, and then the recording fell silent. It happened again several times throughout the day, but never the whole loop, just clips from it. Later that evening, Peyton's dad came up the driveway on his four-wheeler. He said he was looking for their dog, a sweet yellow lab who had been missing since that morning. Dad said he was sorry and that he hadn't seen her. I stared at him, silently begging him to mention the recording, but he didn't. He was a quiet man after all. He didn't want to bring up any unnecessary drama. Mom stayed away the whole week. Dad and I didn't sleep. By Saturday, the screaming could be heard constantly, though it seemed to have deviated from the familiar loop entirely. I didn't recognize any of it. Sometimes the screams were thin and long. Other times they were hardly more than growls. Once, while my dad had been heating up meatloaf for lunch, the noise rose in such a rancorous din that he dropped the plate and it shattered. I pressed my hands over my ears where I sat at the table and squeezed my eyes shut, but it didn't help. The noise forced its way in through the cracks of my fingers and pinched my throat and rattled my rib cage. The din lasted for a whole minute, then fell silent. Dad was shaking. That was the last we heard of the noise that day. Peyton came by Saturday evening to ask permission to cross our road to collect the equipment. He was so excited. I watched him disappear into the creek bottoms with a sense of tired relief. After the equipment was gone, it would all stop. I couldn't wait to get a full night's sleep. Not a minute later, I spotted Peyton coming back up from the creek. I was confused. It had taken us much longer to set up the camera and speakers, so I'd only assumed it would take just as long to collect them. My breath stilled when Peyton came closer. He didn't look right. His eyes were wide and his face pale. Something wet dribbled from his chin and onto his shirt. I later realized it was vomit. My dad caught him before he fell and demanded to know what had happened. Peyton couldn't speak. He just cried. We called his dad. I looked after Peyton as both my dad and his dad went into the bottoms. They were gone a long time. When they returned, their faces were grim, and they smelled funny. I noticed red on my dad's hands. I asked them what was wrong, but they brushed right past me and immediately called the police. Nobody would tell me what had happened. I sat on the couch as a blur of neighbors and police officers swirled around me. At one point, an officer placed something on the kitchen table and left. I looked into the kitchen curiously. It was the camera from the bottoms. I wish I hadn't looked. The camera was a little banged up. Tiny scratches and dents covered the plastic casing. When I lifted it, my hands stuck to the plastic. Something tacky and odorous covered the screen, but it turned on fine. The first set of photos were normal, just the pussy willows cast green in the glow of the night setting. As I continued to click through them, they quickly became strange. At one point, the camera angle changed as if the camera had been knocked from its post. Grass now obscured most of the frame. Flecks of red appeared on the lens and remained for the rest of the sets. One photo made me pause. There was a figure in this one, or half of a figure, as most of the upper torso hadn't made it into the frame. I thought it could be human, but it didn't look like it should be standing upright. Its legs were twisted like an animal, and it seemed to be having difficulty supporting itself in an upright position. Beside the legs, a long, thin arm hung. Whatever it was must have been stooped over, for its fingertips hung below its crooked knees. The next set was different. It was as if the camera had been picked up and was now being held. The first photo was of the bottoms at night. The next startled me. I had to look closely before deciding what it was. A rabbit had been laid in the bushes, but its ears and most of its scalp had been peeled away. The next was of the same rabbit, but a thin, dark hand was holding it up against the sky. Its limp body hung like something from a nightmare. In the following photos, more rabbits joined the one, each with their ears and scalp removed. Then a cat, then more cats, then a dog, the yellow lab, then the lion. The following photo was of 7 rabbits, 3 cats, 1 dog, and the lion, all laid out in a row facing the same way. Their arms and legs had been arranged as if they were marching, like some parade. All of their scalps had been removed, and tiny white glimpses of their skulls could be seen. The last photo was overly bright, like the photo had been taken too close with the flash on. An eye dominated the frame, but it was yellowed and crusty, and had a bar pupil like a horse. In the bottom corner, the edge of a mouth could be seen. No lips, just teeth, sharp and little, with wide gaps of red gum between them. I wish I hadn't looked. I heard my dad talking to the police outside. They said the speakers had malfunctioned. The recording had only played the first night. This is another fabulously creepy story. The description of the creature is giving chupacabra vibes, or maybe the cryptid, the goat man, or something of that nature. But this entity obviously has some sort of sentience to lay out the corpses and film them, and that, I think, adds so much more to the uneasiness factor, you know? It's one thing if an animal is doing its usual survival thing, but this implies this creature knew what it was doing, knew what the technology it had access to did, and wanted someone to see its handiwork. It sent chills up my spine. But let me know what you think in the comments. Another instance of a demonic rabbit, this time living in my head rent-free for years, is an event from the old Cartoon Network show, The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. In the episode Wishbones, a wishing skull is unleashed upon the citizens of Ennsville. This skull has a total of 9 wishes, but it acts more like a monkey's paw, where the wishes have some sort of negative twist to them. This skull, Thromnambular, grants the wish of a kid named Puddin. Puddin wishes for a pet bunny that will love him. In a demonic voice, the bunny asks Puddin if he loves him, before revealing that the type of love he has for Puddin is tough love. The bunny starts beating up Puddin, saying,
"Sometimes love hurts, Puddin, and I love you a lot."
This bunny headbutts Puddin, smacks him around, sends him flying through a window, sends him careening off a cliff and into a cactus farm, nearly runs him over with a semi-truck, pushes him down the opposite direction down a freeway, and after the truck explodes, it emerges from the fire a la Terminator, and the sequence ends with the bunny declaring he loves Puddin to death. Puddin's fate is left unanswered. This is one of my favorite scenes from the entire show. I think the sheer absurdity of it, combined with the slapstick humor, always makes me laugh. Comment your favorite Billy and Mandy moment. As I mentioned, FNAF obviously has demonic rabbits as well. You have the different variations of Bonnie, where at least one has the soul of a dead kid haunting it. But you also have William Afton and his signature Golden Bonnie Springtrap look, with his soul haunting the animatronic, and the various versions of Springtrap to come out of the franchise since then. This next story I'm reading directly from the FNAF novel Fazbear Frights No. 10, Friendly Face. Written by Scott Cawthon and Andrea Waggener, this is Sea Bonnnies. Oh, and since I'm reading directly from the book, you might get a little page-turning ASMR treat for this one. Mott lingered at the edge of the arcade in Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria and contemplated why he still liked this place so much. Was it the decor? The food? The animatronics? No. The truth was that Freddy's, bright, loud, and always over the top, was just a fun place to be. He turned and surveyed the dining area stretching out from the arcade. Even the parents were having a good time. Technically, he should have been outgrowing this place, but Freddy's had a way of getting under the skin. Mott looked down at Rory, his spastic little brother. "Can we get more tickets?" Rory asked. "I almost beat Ben at air hockey. I need a do-over." Mott reached out to ruffle Rory's bright red hair. Predictably, Rory, who recently turned 7 and was too grown up for things like hair ruffling, darted out of Mott's reach and said, "Mott!" in a way that turned one syllable into 3. Mott laughed and pulled a wad of dollar bills from his jeans pocket. "Go beat the pants off him." Rory grinned, grabbed the money, and took off. On the stage that ran the length of Freddy's dining room, Freddy Fazbear and his cohorts, Bonnie and Chica, began a new song. A spinning disco ball overhead started spraying streams of yellow, red, green, and purple lights all over the pizzeria. Mott tapped his foot and began singing along under his breath. "Mott!" a girl called out. He turned to look at the packed tables. A couple of 4- and 5-year-olds bumped into him as they went racing past. He smiled. Had he run around nonstop like that when he was their age? If he had, he could understand his mom's claims that he was responsible for 90% of the wrinkles forming on her still young face. "Over here!" the girl called again. He saw a slender, pink-nailed hand waving from a table a few feet away. It was Teresa, one of the popular girls in his class. He grinned at her, glanced once to check on Rory, and then sauntered across Freddy's black and white checkered floor. Teresa shared a red cloth-covered, pizza and soda-laden table with a man and a woman who had to be her parents. They all shared the same warm brown, almost amber eyes, although neither parent had Teresa's gorgeous smile. Her parents were turned away from her, talking animatedly with another couple at the next table. Mott heard something about golf and the cost of airfare. Mott turned his attention to Teresa, friendly, smart, and petite. Teresa was what his mom called a catch. Though they shared English and algebra classes, they hadn't talked much outside of class. Still, she always smiled at him in hallways. Hey, Teresa. Hi, Mott. Are you here alone? Teresa gestured at the empty chair next to her, and Mott took it. A ponytailed server on roller skates zipped past with a fresh pizza. Aromas of tomato, basil, and cheese teased Mott's nose. His mouth watered. He hadn't eaten before he and Rory came here, figuring they'd get a pizza right away. But Rory had been obsessed with the game since they'd arrived, and they hadn't ordered anything yet. Mott was getting so hungry that even the sickly sweet blue frosted birthday cake that sat near the stage was starting to look good. No, he said. I'm here with my little brother. He's friends with the birthday boy. Same here, my little brother too. Which one is yours? Mott asked, mainly because he had no idea what else to say. Teresa pointed at a boy with dark curls dancing with a bunch of little kids up next to the stage. Yours? She said. He looked over at the arcade. Rory's bright hair made him easy to spot. He and Ben had left the air hockey table and were charging this way. Rory probably wanted more money for tokens. Wow, really? He doesn't look like you, Teresa said. Mott wasn't sure what to say to that, so he just shrugged. But she was right. Rory got his red hair from their mother. Mott had their dad's plain brown hair, thankfully. Rory, with tufts of red that refused to lie down properly on his head, his overlarge eyes and mouth, and his face full of freckles, was always going to be kind of goofy looking. Mott, on the other hand, had been getting girls' stares long before he wanted to. When he turned 13 a few months before, he finally began to welcome all that attention. According to his mom, he was objectively good looking. The components of this assessment apparently were his natural wavy hair, his hooded dark brown eyes, his strong chin, and his great teeth. In the last couple months, he'd also shot up a few inches, and he'd started working out. His shoulders were getting broad. He was beginning to see what his mom saw. Apparently, girls like Teresa were seeing it too. Don't let it get to your head, his mom had told him. If you do, I'll ground you for the rest of your life. Smiling at the memory, he said to Teresa, on a good day, I'll admit Rory looks like our mom. On a bad day, I tell him he was left on our doorstep by sea monkeys. Rory raced up to the table just in time to hear what Mott said. I was not, he shouted. Then he stuck out his hand. I want more tickets. Mott sighed and dug in his pocket for a few more dollars. He'd have paid several $100s to make Rory go away so he could keep talking to Teresa. Rory took the money Mott held out and ran off without saying thank you. Teresa laughed, then made a face. I hate sea monkeys. Mott laughed too. Exactly, creepy little things. He winked. The real ones, not my brother. Teresa shivered. I know what you mean. The real ones are like centipedes with tentacles and tails. Freddie and his band segued into another cover of a popular song, this one with a rocking beat. Teresa scooted her chair close to Mott. This is a good song, don't you think? Mott nodded. I do, but I think I like this group's ballads better. He named another song by the same group who'd originally done this one. Teresa bounced in her seat. Oh yeah, that's a really good one. You like ballads? I'm learning to play the guitar, and that's what I like to sing. I'd love to hear you sometime, Mott said. Teresa beamed at him. They spent the next several minutes talking music, and Mott had pretty much forgotten where he was until he glanced up and saw Rory galloping over, bouncing off a couple other kids and 2 tables as he came. He was grinning wildly, and he held up what looked like a new toy, something in bright-colored cardboard and plastic packaging. Rory was going so fast that when he got to the table, he plowed right into Mott and started to lose his balance. Mott grabbed his brother's arm and kept him upright. Look what I got, Mott! Rory half yelled, half screamed. He was only a few inches from Mott now, and Mott winced at the excessive decibel level. As he often did, he wished Rory had a volume control he could dial down. Rory's blaring announcement had gotten Teresa's and her parents' attention. They all smiled at Rory as Mott asked, with as much enthusiasm as he could muster, What did you get? Rory started waving around his treasure. He waved it so rapidly that Mott still couldn't tell what it was. He frowned, trying to read the words on the waving package. Sea Bonnnies, Rory said. I got sea Bonnnies! Look! He kept waving the package. I'm trying to look, Mott said. He reached out and snatched the package. Rory jumped up and down like he was on an invisible pogo stick. Mott focused on the package in his hand. Against a black checked background, bright red letters announced that the package contained Astounding Live Sea Bonnnies, Under the words, the image of a seriously disquieting little purplish-blue creature that appeared to be a cross between a sea monkey and a rabbit was encircled by a bright blue blob of what was probably supposed to be water. Next to the image, the package promised, "Contains everything you need to grow and nurture your own sea bunnies." Beneath that, plastic sheathing covered 4 packets, designed to start your own healthy colony of happy sea bunnies. There were 2 packets of Sea Bonnnies live eggs, one of Sea Bonnie water purification powder, and one of Sea Bonnie super duper growth food. At the bottom of the packaging, bright blue letters proclaimed, "Guaranteed to live for 3 years." Mott made a face and looked at Rory. "Really?" Rory was still hopping up and down. Now he giggled and shouted, "You said sea monkeys left me on the doorstep, not sea monkeys, sea Bonnies." Rory let loose with one of his high-pitched laughs. He clearly thought he was hilarious. He spun in a gleeful circle. "Now I can have some of my real brothers and sisters around." He laughed some more, quite pleased with himself. Mott shook his head and felt Teresa leaning in behind him, and he showed her the package. "Ew," she said. He nodded in agreement. Rory plucked the package from Mott's hand. "They're awesome!" "Sure they are," Mott said. As soon as Mott and Rory got home, Rory darted into the kitchen to find their mother, who was tearing up lettuce for a salad. Beef stew simmered on the 6-burner Viking range that was his mom's pride and joy. She loved to cook. Rory showed his mom the Sea Bonnies package and started talking nonstop as he climbed up onto one of the wood stools in front of the granite-covered island where she worked. Their mom set the lettuce aside and began chopping tomatoes and cucumbers for the salad. For one blissful moment, all Mott could hear was the faint hum of the fan above the range, the intermittent tap of his mom's knife against the cutting board, and the delicious stew bubbling. But then Rory started jabbering, and all Mott could hear was his chatterbox of a brother. Rory waved his Sea Bonnies package under his mother's nose. She blinked at it but kept working on the salad. Rory didn't seem to care. "Sea Bonnies are basically like sea monkeys, but they're genetically engineered to look like Bonnie. You know, Bonnie from Freddy's," Rory said. Mott and his mother exchanged a smile at Rory's version of genetically engineered. Rory kept talking. "They're super cool looking, and Fazbear Entertainment only came out with them last month. That's what Ben said. He usually buys all the new stuff, but his parents wouldn't let him get any Sea Bonnies because they said Pewter might eat them, and they didn't think that would be good for Pewter, and that wouldn't be good for the Sea Bonnies either." He giggled wildly. Mott looked at his mom over the top of Rory's head. He shrugged. Wearing her usual stay-at-home clothes, black yoga pants, and a baggy white shirt, his mom brushed a strand of red hair from her blue eyes. She scratched her freckled nose and smiled. "Pewter is the family cat, right?" his mom said. "Oh yeah," Rory said. "Don't you think I should get a bigger fish tank now that Fritz is going to have friends? I mean, I know the small one fits on my desk, and the Sea Bonnies can help Fritz keep me company while I do homework and color and stuff. But if we got me a big tank with a stand, I could put it on the other side of the room under the window. Oh, no, wait. What if we got a huge one, and we put it in the living room? Oh, no, wait. Then I wouldn't have them in my room. I think I want them in my room. Maybe I should get more, and we could get 2 tanks, and..." While Rory talked and Mott tried not to listen to him, their mom wiped her hands on a dish towel. She stepped over and gently put a hand over Rory's mouth. "Take a breath, sweetie," she said. "It's genetically engineered," Mott said in the blessed quiet that suddenly filled the kitchen. "Not genetically engined." His mom gave him a look and shook her head. He rolled his eyes. She crossed the shiny wood floor to the stainless steel refrigerator and opened it to grab a bottle of salad dressing. "Do Sea Bonnies have the same water temperature requirement that Fritz has?" she asked. Rory said, "Huh? May I see the package?" Mott asked Rory. Rory shrugged and handed it over. Mott scanned the instructions on the back of the package. He frowned. "Isn't it 74 degrees now?" His mother nodded. "The water needs to be 75 to 81 degrees for them to hatch. Then it can go back down. I wonder if cranking it up to like 78 or something would be okay for a goldfish for the 24 hours it takes to hatch the Sea Bonnie eggs." "Maybe you can research that after dinner," his mom said. Mott shrugged. "Sure, why not? That's what all the cool kids do on Saturday nights." She laughed. "No, that's what the cool kids wish they were doing. Instead, they're going to boring things like movies and parties." "I feel sorry for them," Mott said. Rory, who had been examining his sea bonnies with great pride and joy, suddenly pointed at a spot on the package. "What's that word?" Mott looked under his brother's dirty index finger. "Colony." "What's a colony?" Mott let his mom take that one. When she finished defining the word, Rory screwed up his face and announced, "I want an empire, not a colony. That's bigger, right? Maybe I should get another package of them." "One package is enough," his mom told him. Rory squinted and took a deep breath, in clear preparation for a loud rebellion. Mott spoke quickly. "You can call it whatever you want, you know." Rory tilted his head. "I can?" "Absolutely," Mott and his mom said in unison. After dinner, and after determining that Fritz wouldn't be harmed by a day or so of 78-degree water, Mott helped Rory get his tank set up for the sea bonnies. Rory's tank was small, maybe 16 inches by 10 inches or so. It held 5 gallons, more water than Fritz needed, but Mott thought Fritz always looked content in his domain. Mott idly wondered what Fritz would think about the soon-to-be interlopers. Did Fish think? Lifting the tank's lid and waiting while Rory said hello to Fritz, Mott opened the sea bonnies package. "Okay, the first step," he told Rory, "is to put this in." He handed Rory the packet of water purifier. At Rory's insistence, he read the ingredients: salt, some kind of water conditioner, and some brine shrimp eggs. "That's all we can do today," Mott told a frustrated Rory when his little brother wanted to dump all the other packets in too. "The instructions say to wait 24 hours, then we'll put in the eggs. Those will be the genetically engineered eggs." "Why do we have to wait?" Rory scowled. Mott shrugged. "Because the packaging says so." He didn't bother telling Rory that the whole process was weird. He read the contents of the eggs packet, and he was surprised to see it also contained yeast, borax, soda, salt, and blue dye. "What about this?" Rory asked, holding up the food packet. Mott referred to the instructions. "That goes in after the eggs hatch." The food packet contained more yeast and some spirulina. It would have to be added every few days. Because Mott didn't trust Rory not to dump everything in the tank at once, he took the packets when he left Rory's room. Rory protested, but when he started to throw a tantrum, their mom appeared to smooth things over. Mott felt bad that she had to intervene. Their dad was a commercial airline pilot who was often away, which meant Mom had to run the house and do most everything at home. She also worked full-time at an event planning firm and was trying to start her own company in her spare time, of which she had little. To compound matters, most of the events she planned happened in the evening, and she had to be there to oversee them. Mott wasn't sure when his mom slept, and even with all that, she never acted annoyed when she was interrupted. "Mom," Mott said, "I'll get him ready for bed. Go rest." "Sure?" she asked. "Sure." "You're a good son," his mom said. "I know," he laughed. With just a little wheedling, Mott got Rory into the bathroom to brush his teeth. While he brushed, Rory chattered about school and his friends and the new puppy that Danny and his family had gotten a couple weeks before. Toothpaste shot all over the place as Rory talked. Used to this routine, Mott wiped down the counter and the floor. Eventually, Rory spit the remainder of his toothpaste into the sink. Mott used a wet washcloth to wipe Rory's face. Rory wriggled out of his reach. "I want a puppy," Rory said. "When's Dad coming home?" "He's doing non-stops this week," Mott said. He'd opted for answering the second question first. It was easier. "I think he'll be home for a few days next week." "Maybe he'll get us a puppy while he's home," Rory said. "Maybe Mom will get us a puppy when you demonstrate a little responsibility." Rory twisted his lips in concentration. "How do I do that?" Mott considered what he could get away with. "Well, maybe if you cleaned up your room, didn't yell so much, and stopped interrupting me and Mom whenever—" Rory shouted. "No, I know what I can do." "Shh." Rory lowered his voice to just above normal volume. "I can help Danny with da pup." "Da pup?" Mott repeated. "That's the puppy's name. His dad kept asking, 'Where's da puppy?' And his mom said they might as well call him that. His whole name is Da Puppy, but they call him Da Pup. Danny likes to follow Da Pup around and say over and over, 'What's up, Da Pup?'" Rory giggled gleefully. Mott laughed. He couldn't help it. Rory was a lot of annoying things, but he was also entertaining at all get out. Apparently, so were Danny and his family. "Okay," Mott said. "Let's get you to bed." Following Rory into his room, Mott shut Rory's bedroom door so Rory's jibber-jabber didn't bother their mother. "Now Danny's bugging his parents for a kitten," Rory went on. "He wants to name it Da Cat or Da Kitten." Rory launched himself toward his bed, spun in midair, and landed on his back. He kicked his legs in the air like an upturned beetle and let out another trill of giggles. "Where are your PJs, Goofus?" Mott asked. Rory sat up, his eyes dancing. He grabbed his pillow. "Under the bed, doofus." Mott bent over to look under the bed, and a pillow hit him in the side of his head. He rose to find Rory looking at the ceiling and whistling. Mott glanced around as if searching for something. A pillow just hit me in the head. I wonder where it came from. Rory giggled. "Did it come from under the bed?" Mott asked. He stuck his head under the bed and spotted green and yellow dinosaur-patterned PJs. As he reached for them, another pillow struck his shoulders. Mott whipped his head out from under the bed and jumped to his feet, feigning shock and outrage. He dropped the PJs on the bed. "Another one? Is there an invisible pillow thrower in this room?" He whirled in a circle, wearing a fierce expression as Rory giggled louder. "Show yourself, you pillow-throwing milksop." Mott leaned over and picked up the thrown pillows. "I'll beat you in a fair fight if you have the metal." He struck a warrior pose, both pillows raised. Rory, struggling against a rising tide of giggles, shouted, "What's a milksop? And why does he need metal?" Mott cocked his head. "Hark, methinks these questions are a misdirect." He glowered at Rory. "Dost thou do the pillow-thrower's bidding, young lad? Are thee in cahoots with the namby-pamby?" Rory laughed so hard he snorted. He reached for the only remaining pillow on his bed. Mott turned his back to Rory and pretended to look for the pillow-thrower again. The third pillow hit him in the back. "Outrageous!" he bellowed, leaning to pick up the latest pillow. He rotated to face Rory. "I've no choice but to unleash my retaliation upon thine own countenance, young minion of the invisible pillow-thrower." Making sure he didn't throw too hard, Mott fired all 3 pillows at Rory, who dove under the covers, squealing and laughing. Mott fell on him and started tickling him. Rory shrieked and laughed louder. "Dost thou surrender?" Mott asked. Rory gasped. "Yes, yes!" His breath smelled like his peppermint toothpaste. Mott stopped tickling his brother. Rory, his face flushed, his eyes wet with happy tears, grinned up at Mott. "You didn't answer my question." Mott reached for the PJs, which had landed on the floor again during the roughhousing. "What? Oh, you mean milksop and metal?" Rory nodded. Mott handed Rory his PJs. "Put these on. A milksop is someone who is indecisive or doesn't have courage. It comes from how little kids used to sop up milk with their bread." Rory frowned, then nodded. "I like that word." "And it's M-E-T-T-L-E, not M-E-T-A-L," Mott said as Rory pulled up his PJ top. "Metal," he spelled it again. "Means the ability to cope with difficulties, someone who can bounce back from an attack easily." Rory exchanged his jeans for his PJ pants. "That's another good word." "I agree," Mott said. "Let's get you under the covers." Rory yawned and crawled under the covers head first. Mott rolled his eyes. "Turn around, Goofus." Rory giggled from under the covers. He rotated, and his tousled head appeared. "What's namby-pamby?" Mott helped Rory get situated in bed. "It's another word for milksop, but it also means someone without much strength." "I'm not a namby-pamby or a milksop," Rory said. "No, you aren't," Mott agreed. Mott got home late on Monday evening. He and his 2 best friends, Nate and Lyle, had to work on a science project, and they'd met at Nate's house to work on it. Nate's dad, Dr. Tabor, aka Dr. T, was a pediatrician who had been Mott's doctor since Mott was a baby. Nate and Mott had become friends because they'd met at Dr. Tabor's office when they were about 2. Dr. T's wife, an engineer, had an important meeting that day, so Dr. T had brought his son to work with him. Nate and Mott had taken over the blocks in the waiting room play area, building an impressive fort that none of the other kids in the waiting room were allowed to touch. Dr. T had told Mott's mom that the boys' friendship clearly was meant to be and suggested the parents get together for dinner while the kids had a play date. Or at least, that's what Mott's mom had told him. He didn't remember any of it. All he knew was that his parents were good friends with Nate's parents, and he was good friends with Nate. His earliest memory of Nate was the 2 of them trying to climb up on a counter to steal freshly baked cookies. They both ended up in Dr. T's office with contusions and mild burns from the hot cookie sheets. Not that Mott remembered that either. He just remembered the chair ladder they'd built, and he remembered a lot of pain. Over the years, Dr. T had become like a dad to Mott. Dr. T believed that work and home life should be properly balanced, so he opened his clinic near the neighborhood, close to the end of the green belt that ran past the back of Mott's house. Dr. T started work really early, but he never worked late, never worked weekends, and he was always ready and willing to play or help with school. Tonight he was helping the boys get started on their science project, which was a study of the effects of antibiotics on microorganisms. Having access to a doctor came in handy. Dr. T had gotten a small amount of 4 types of antibiotics: penicillin, streptomycin, aureomycin, and terramycin. He'd also gotten a syringe, a petri dish, flasks and beakers, and some pipettes. Mott and his friends had been tasked with getting everything else they'd need: a potato, agar, dextrose, distilled water, garden soil, and pens that would write on glass. When they'd complained about the agar and dextrose, "What in the heck are those?" Nate had asked his dad. Dr. T had gotten them too. Dr. T and Nate had always done 99% of the experiment. Lyle was bored out of his mind and mostly tried to make music with the pipettes and the beakers. Mott wasn't bored, but he was puzzled by the complex process, what with this being heated and that being mixed in. Thanks to Dr. T, he did eventually understand what they were doing, and he was looking forward to seeing what microorganism colonies grew in the petri dishes they sat next to the heat register in Nate's house. They had bets going on which antibiotics would keep the colonies from growing. 2 cheeseburgers and a milkshake on penicillin, Nate said. I'll take that bet, Lyle said, if we throw in a couple large fries. How about you, Mott? I'm with Nate, Mott said. Lyle rolled his eyes. Well, then if you're wrong, it had better be 2 milkshakes. You're going down, Nate said. Mott laughed with his friends and said good night. He biked home a little after 9, when it was dark. When he pulled his bike into the garage, Rory met him at the door leading into the kitchen, flailing around in excitement. Come look, come look! Mott followed his exuberant brother up the stairs and down the long hallway, pausing only to drop his backpack in his own room. When they went into Rory's room, he pointed and stomped back and forth in front of his desk, as if performing a ceremonial dance on the strewn clothes and toys all over his blue shag rug-covered floor. Look! He shouted. Mott stepped over a plastic cement truck and cardboard castle, and 2 spaceship models to stand before Rory's fish tank, which sat on Rory's desk, surrounded by a clutter of school books, coloring books, puzzles, and crayons. Even partially hidden by all the piles, it was clear that the tank no longer contained just water and Fritz. It was now filled with tiny, wriggling shapes. Mott leaned over to get a better look. He immediately wished he hadn't. Straightening, Mott rubbed away the goosebumps that had just erupted all over his forearms. Oh, this is just wrong. Aren't they great? Rory asked. Mott rolled his eyes. You're a seriously weird little kid. What are you, part sea monster? Are you part... He gulped loudly. Creep from the deep beyond? Rory stopped stomping in glee and turned to frown at Mott. What do you mean by that? Although he leaned away from the tank, Mott hadn't been able to pull his gaze from the disgusting things swimming around the goldfish in the tank. The sea Bonnnies had hatched. Dozens of them. No, make that hundreds. They looked like semi-translucent, fleshy, pale blue-purple rabbits with tiny black eyes and almost microscopic furry tentacles lining their bodies. From what Mott could tell, they appeared to propel themselves through the water using their misshapen rabbit ears. Rory tugged on the hem of Mott's brown polo shirt. Huh? Mott said. Why did you say that? Why did you say I'm part sea monster? Rory punched Mott's leg hard enough to make Mott grimace. That was mean. Ignoring his brother's upset, Mott pointed to the sea Bonnnies. You actually like these things? He asked. Rory turned to look at them. His hurt feelings forgotten, he grinned. Sure, they're super coolio. Mott crossed his arms. Rory, they're disgusting. Rory kicked out at Mott and barely missed Mott's shin. That's not nice to say stuff like that. You're going to make them feel bad. He reached out to the fish tank and stroked the glass like he was trying to soothe his mutant pets. Whatever, Mott scoffed. He started to turn away and leave the room, but an abrupt movement in the tank yanked his gaze back to the sea Bonnnies. He lifted his eyebrows. The sea Bonnnies had moved, in a giant cluster, to where Rory's hand had brushed against the side of the tank. Fritz still swam lazily at the far side of the tank, but the sea Bonnnies were all together near the glass under Rory's hand. It was like they were responding to his gesture. The goosebumps reappeared on Mott's arm. He shook his head, annoyed with himself for being unnerved by tiny, deviant brine shrimp. Their movement must have been some kind of reflexive response to motion or shadow, he figured. He turned toward the door to Rory's room. "Apologize," Rory said. Mott stopped and gave Rory a look. "To you or your swimming freaks there?" Rory put both his fists on his skinny hips. "Both!" Mott laughed at his brother. A burbling sound came from the fish tank, and Mott's attention returned to it. He blinked and stared. Although Fritz still floated toward the back of the tank, the sea Bonnnies had shifted so they were lined up in a disturbingly ordered formation along the front of the fish tank. He couldn't tell for sure because they were so small, but from where he stood it looked to Mott like all the sea Bonnnies were facing forward, looking at him. Mott swallowed hard and took a step back. Obviously, the sea Bonnnies weren't in any sort of formation, and they weren't looking at him. That wasn't possible. "Mott, say you're sorry!" Rory yelled. "What's going on in here?" Mott turned to see his mom standing in the doorway of Rory's room. She had a blue laundry basket full of folded clothes propped against her waist. Rory charged over to her and threw his bony arms around her thighs. He spewed out his grievances so fast that all his words bunched up together. "Mott called me a sea monster, and he insulted my sea Bonnnies, and he said that they were disgusting. He was mean. He won't apologize." Mott's mom used her free hand to pat Rory's shoulder. She looked at Mott over the top of Rory's head and raised one eyebrow. Mott knew that look. It said, "You're not wrong, but can you humor your little brother?" He sighed and nodded. "Rory?" Rory sniffed and turned to frown at Mott. Mott squatted to look Rory in the eye. "I'm very sorry I insulted you and your friends. I was just kidding, but I shouldn't have kidded you that way." He noticed that Rory had a smudge of chocolate at the corner of his pouty lips and several blonde crumbs on the front of his green and blue striped shirt. His breath smelled like the chocolate chip cookie he'd clearly snuck from the kitchen. Mott reached out and cleaned up both crumbs and chocolate with his thumb. Rory squirmed away and said, begrudgingly, "It's okay." He realized that he was checking them because he wanted to see if his apology had mollified them any more than it had his brother. They were swimming around in the tank, exactly as you'd expect sea monkey-like creatures to do. He must have imagined their earlier behavior. But why would he have done that? Was he that freaked out by the abnormal little creatures? He rotated back to his mother. "Can I help you with any of that?" He waved a hand at the laundry basket. She flashed him a smile. "I've got it. Go ahead. I assume you only worked on science at Nate's, right?" Mott nodded. She was right. He still had more homework to do. Mott started to leave the room, but he hesitated when he heard his name being whispered. He looked back at his mom, who was tucking socks into one of the drawers in Rory's dresser. "Did you say something?" he asked her. She looked over at him. "Nope." He stepped into the hallway, and he heard it again. A whisper.
Matt!
And more. This time, he also heard,
"Scaredy cat."
He whirled and glared at Rory. "What did you just call me?" Both Rory and their mom widened their eyes at Mott. "What in the world, Mott?" He frowned. Rory didn't just... "I'm not doing nothing wrong," Rory said. "Anything wrong," his mom said automatically. To Mott, she said, "What did you think you heard?" He shook his head. He had to have been imagining things. Suddenly, he realized that the whisper he'd heard hadn't been either his mother's or his brother's voice. And come to think of it, the whisper hadn't been a single whisper. It had sounded like several whisper tones coming in unison. Mostly together, but just slightly off, resulting in a faint echo. It couldn't be. He glanced at the fish tank. The sea Bonnnies were swimming around aimlessly until he looked. Then they suddenly swam to the end of the tank as a unit. They all looked through the glass at him. He opened his mouth to ask his mom if she was seeing what he was seeing, and he immediately realized what a bad idea that was. Pull it together. Their brains aren't large enough to understand complex speech, let alone generate it. Instead, he returned to his room. Clearly, he needed some sleep. After closing his door, Mott stared at the knob for an uncomfortable moment. He locked it. The next morning, Rory was in a dither because he couldn't find his lucky striped socks, which he had to wear because he and his best friend Danny were going to have a swing-off during recess. "And this is more important than me preparing for my algebra quiz?" Mott muttered as he pawed through Rory's drawers in frustration. Not to mention getting to talk to Teresa before class, he thought. he heard a whispered response to his initial dialogue.
As if a girl would pay attention to you.
Mott whipped his head toward Rory, but Rory wasn't even in the room. Mott was in here alone. Or not. He turned toward the fish tank. Sure enough, the sea bonnies were all clustered at the end nearest to Mott. They were watching him. Again. Before he knew what he was doing, he spat back. "You're just glorified fish bait." Rory ran into the room. "What'd you say?" He held up one of his striped socks. "This was in the hamper. I don't know where the other one is, though." Ungluing his eyes from the fish tank, Mott noticed his heart rate had picked up. He swallowed and said, very slowly and very calmly, "Why don't you go check Mom's room? Maybe your socks got mixed up with hers by mistake. When I'm done looking in here, I'll check my socks." "Okay." Rory scampered out of the room. Mott looked at the sea bonnies, and he flinched. The water in the fish tank was choppy. He could hear it sloshing, and he could see bubbles shooting up through the middle of the tank. The sea bonnies were agitating, as a group, as if they were. Mott strode out of Rory's room, and he ran right into Rory. "Oof!" Rory grunted loudly. He bounced off Mott and grinned. "Look!" He held up a pair of striped socks, not his own, but similar in color. "Mom's letting me wear her lucky socks. She says they're even luckier than mine." Mott tried to talk, but couldn't. He was too busy processing what he'd just seen. Rory didn't seem to notice. He went around Mott and dropped to the floor to put on his mother's socks. Mott's head was suddenly throbbing. He rubbed his temple. Could simple organisms like sea bonnies even get angry? Because that was what it had looked like in Rory's tank. It had looked like the sea bonnies were reacting to his insult. And before that, it had sounded like they'd been taunting him again. "Mott?" Mott blinked and saw his mother standing just outside his parents' room. She wore a beige suit, and her long red hair was in a French braid. "Why are you standing in the hall?" she asked. "Are you all right?" Mott frowned. He opened his mouth, but he still couldn't talk. His mouth was horribly dry. His mom put her hand against his forehead. "You feel warm. Are you coming down with something? Do you want to stay home from school?" "No." Ah, there was his voice. His mom raised her eyebrow. Okay. Wow. I must have the weirdest teen in recorded history. I give him a chance to skip school and he jumps down my throat." Mott coughed and moistened his teeth with his tongue. Sorry, Mom. I didn't mean to snap at you. It's just that... His mom's phone rang and she raised a finger. Thankful for the reprieve, Mott went into his room to get his backpack. Rory thundered in behind him. "I'm going to take Danny down," he announced. He flexed non-existent muscles and puffed his cheeks. Mott turned Rory around and gave him a gentle push out into the hallway. His mom got off the phone and looked at her sons. "Are we ready?" "Let's get out of here," Mott said. He winced at his mom's strange look. "I mean, let's go." Mott was in no hurry to get home that afternoon, but he couldn't come up with a decent excuse to be late. His mom had asked him to bike over to the grade school and escort Rory home, and she'd asked him to look after Rory until she got home later that evening. If he broke his promise, it would mess up her work. Mott had hoped that when he got home, he could get Rory to play outside, but rain started coming down on their way home, and it was steady by the time they put their bikes away. "Go get dried off," Mott said to Rory. "Then come to my room and I'll help you with your homework." "No, you come to my room," Rory said. "I'm supposed to write a poem about something I have that I like a lot. I'm going to write about my sea bonnies. You have to help me." "Oh, joy," Mott said. Mott was a little unnerved to notice that his hands were shaking when he left his backpack in his room. Really? He was afraid of tiny, squirming sea critters confined to a glorified fishbowl? "Get a grip," he breathed as he went down the hall into Rory's room. Rory sat at his desk, a piece of paper in front of him, a pencil grasped tightly in his right hand. He was staring raptly at his sea bonnies. Mott eyed the tank warily. For a few seconds after his gaze landed on the sea bonnies, they swam around normally. Then, as if they realized he was in the room, they suddenly shot to the end of the tank and lined up in formation. Hundreds of pin-sized black eyes appeared to be focused directly on him. "Rory!" "What?" Rory's gaze didn't leave the tank. "Do you see what they're doing?" Mott asked. "Huh?" Rory looked over at Mott. The sea bonnies. See how they're all lined up?" Rory looked at the sea bonnies. They were milling about separately. Mott felt a growl-like sound rise up in his throat. The little monsters. They were messing with him.
You're so easy to mess with.
A chorus of whispers tickled his ears. Mott clamped his hands over his ears and started humming. He wasn't sure how long he stood there humming. Probably not long. Rory was capable of sitting still for only a nanosecond or so. He couldn't have been waiting at his desk for long before he started yanking at Mott's shirt. Mott opened his eyes and looked at his brother. What, Rory? What's a word that rhymes with love? Above. Dove. Mott chewed the inside of his cheek. That's all I can think of right now. Above works.
Stupid.
The whispers came again. I need to go to the bathroom, Mott told Rory. Stay in here and behave. When you're done with your poem, come and get me in my room. But, Rory began. Mott didn't wait. He bolted down the hall and escaped into the bathroom. He wasn't sure how long he remained in the small, white-tiled room. He didn't need to use the toilet, so he sat on the edge of the tub and stared at the fish-patterned blue and white wallpaper. He shivered. Was it fish in general that were weirding him out now? He gazed at the wallpaper. Would the blue fish whisper at him too? He waited. Nope. No whispers. That was because the sounds weren't in his head, or at least they weren't being manufactured in his head. The sounds were coming from the sea Bonnnies. He was sure of it. Mott! Rory shouted through the door. He pounded on the door so hard it rattled in its frame. I'm ready! Mott sighed and stood, taking a deep breath. He opened the door. Come look, Rory said. He motioned for Mott to follow him back to his bedroom. I said you can read it in my room, Mott said. Rory turned and shook his head. No, you have to come see this. It's super duper coolio. Mott swallowed and accompanied Rory. In Rory's room, Rory walked over to the fish tank and began reading. When I saw my sea Bonnnies, I felt love. It was like a gift from Freddy above. They're super cool, and they make me glad. I like that, 'cause I hate being sad. Rory pointed to the sea Bonnnies and looked over at Mott with a face shining with happiness. See? He said. They like it. Mott made himself look in the tank. Oh, man. As much as the sea Bonnnies seemed to dislike Mott, they appeared to love Rory. They were all in formation again, lined up at the glass in front of Mott's little brother. Their little see-through tails were shimmying in unison. Well, at least the revolting little monsters are nice to my brother, Mott thought. It's a good poem, Mott said to Rory. Rory turned to beam at him. Behind Rory, the sea Bonnnies darted, as one, to the end of the aquarium, and they all focused on Mott. Or again, it looked like they did. Do you want to go play my video game with me? Mott asked Rory. Really? Sure. Rory ran toward Mott, his sea Bonnnies and his poem momentarily forgotten. Mott hummed as he and Rory trotted toward the stairs. Behind him, whispers reached for his ears, but he hummed louder and refused to listen. Mott managed to avoid his brother's room for the rest of the evening. When his mother got home, he told her Rory had been restless, so Mott hadn't had time to do his homework. She took over Rory duty, and Mott retreated to his room, because, distressingly, he could still hear the faintest of whispers in his own room. He put in his earbuds and listened to music while he studied. He kept in the earbuds while he got ready for bed, taking them out only for a couple of minutes to say goodnight to his mom. Then he went to bed wearing the earbuds. When he got up the next morning, he went from earbuds to shower to earbuds to out the door. He avoided breakfast by telling his mom he had to go to school early to meet with Nate and Lyle so they could talk about an upcoming history project. The truth was their history project was weeks away, but he figured a lie in the interest of remaining sane was a lie worth telling. Over lunch, sitting with his friends, eating his cheese sandwich, he thought about telling them what was going on, but he knew his friends. They didn't share more than one serious bone between them. Mostly, they were one big laugh fest. There was no way they'd do anything but make fun of Mott if he told them what he thought about the sea Bonnnies. After algebra that afternoon, he briefly considered telling Teresa about his experience with the sea Bonnnies. He knew she was as grossed out by them as he was, so she might be inclined to believe him. But maybe next weekend? She asked him. Mott realized he missed all of whatever she'd just told him. I'm so sorry, he said. My head was someplace else. Teresa laughed. I do that all the time. I said we're going camping this weekend, but I was wondering if you'd like to get together next weekend and study. I'm having trouble with two variable linear equations. I was hoping you could help me. She looked really pretty today. Her shiny hair was caught back in a yellow scarf that matched her short dress. Mott grinned. Sure. He'd help her shovel manure if she asked. He didn't think telling a pretty girl that you think tiny mutant brine shrimp were whispering to you was a good way to impress her. He kept his fears to himself. If only he could stay away from home. But he couldn't. His mom was used to him enjoying being at home. He spent most of his afternoons with Rory and most of his evenings with his mom, when she wasn't at an event. She would find it bizarre if he suddenly wanted to stay over at Nate or Lyle, and his friends would too. He'd just have to avoid Rory's room. This plan worked for much of the evening. He got Rory involved in another video game in the living room. Then he suggested they all play a board game after dinner. When the game concluded, Mott started to tell his mom he had a headache. Unfortunately, she beat him to it. Can you get Rory ready for bed, Mott? His mom held a palm to the side of her head. I have a tension headache, and I need to lie down. Mott's reluctance must have shown on his face. She frowned when she looked at him and said, I'll give you extra allowance this week. Mott shook his head. Forget that. It's okay. Sorry, I was just... Never mind. Of course, I'll get him into bed. Let's read Foxy and Bonnie on the High Seas, Rory shouted. Mott's mom drew away from the sound and headed out of the room. Dial it down, buddy, Mott said. Mom has a headache. Oh, Rory turned to watch their mom go up the stairs. Sorry, Mom, he yelled. Mott shook his head and ruffled Rory's hair. Rory emitted his multisyllabic, Mott, and galloped up the stairs. Mott turned off all the lights, checked that the doors were locked and the security system was on, and then he followed his brother up to the second floor. A long 20 minutes later, Mott had Rory settled and in bed. You need to get to sleep, Mott told his brother. He handed Rory the plush Freddy Fazbear he liked to sleep with. Nope, Rory said. Read! He clutched Freddy and pointed to the nightstand. The book he'd referred to earlier was lying under a rolled-up comic book, a slingshot, and a half-empty package of gum.
Yeah, read.
The whispers commanded. Mott ground his teeth, but he reached for the book. He knew better than to try to leave Rory's room without reading to him. Rory was quite capable of pitching an ear-splitting fit, and if he did that, it would delay Mott's exit from the room even longer. So he reached for the book and pulled it out, sending the slingshot and the gum to the floor. He didn't bother to pick them up. He just started reading where he'd last left off. He read fast and he read loudly, but Rory didn't seem to care. He listened rapidly for several minutes, and then his eyes began to droop. Mott kept reading loudly. He was almost shouting. Just as he'd been with all his silly antics earlier, he was trying to drown out the whispers. Thankfully, Rory could sleep through a hurricane. He burrowed down under the covers, tucked Freddy under his chin, and closed his eyes tightly. In seconds, Mott could hear Rory's little kid snores, even over the shouted reading. Mott stopped reading, laid the book on the nightstand, and stood all in one motion. He was ready to get out of here. He turned off the wagon wheel lamp on the nightstand, but the room didn't go dark. Rory had a nightlight plugged in near his door, and the fish tank had a light, which was still on. Mott turned and prepared to sprint out of the room.
Namby-pamby,
The whispers taunted. Mott froze, feeling like he couldn't back down from a challenge made by something as small as a sea bonnie. He turned to glare at the hideous things. Expecting to see them glaring back at him, he was surprised to find them all clustered together near the back of the tank. He started to walk by, but then he did a double take. They weren't just clustered together. They were clustered together around Fritz. They were attacking him. Mott made a beeline for the fish tank to save Fritz, but he realized there was nothing he could do without a net. He looked around wildly. Where was the net that he used to remove Fritz when he had to clean the fish tank? Mott started opening Rory's desk drawers, and then he snapped his fingers. Rory had taken the thing into the bathroom. He had been playing with it in the tub. Mott tore out of Rory's room. He raced down the hall to the bathroom. Yep, there was the net, sitting on the side of the tub. Grabbing it, Mott ran back into Rory's room. He charged over to the fish tank. As Mott reached out for the tank's lid, he froze. The sea bonnies were nowhere near Fritz. They were swimming around in the tank, acting like normal sea bonnies. And Fritz was swimming around by himself. He looked just fine. Had Mott imagined what he'd seen? Mott leaned closer to be sure Fritz was okay. He appeared to be... Mott blinked and frowned. Fritz was not okay. Fritz was different. He didn't appear to be orange anymore. What had the sea Bonnnies done to him? Ignoring his distaste for the sea Bonnnies, Mott went over to the tank to get a closer look at the goldfish. Upon close, it was clear that not only was Fritz's color off, his shape was weird too. Now a faded blue, not unlike the color of the sea Bonnnies. Fritz was a little lumpy, as if he'd... No, hang on. He wasn't lumpy. Mott gasped. But he couldn't pull himself away from the tank. He had to see. He leaned closer, putting his face almost up to the glass. Fritz was drifting lazily through the cluster of sea Bonnnies toward the back of the tank. Mott had to wait until Fritz turned to circle toward the front of the tank. He remained still, almost holding his breath, as the no longer gold fish came his way. As soon as Fritz swam toward the front wall of the tank, Mott's stomach turned. He covered his mouth as he stared at the fish. Mott had been right when he'd first seen it. Fritz wasn't just lumpy. Something was moving inside Fritz. No, not inside. Mott squinted at the fish as it swam past his gaze. Something was moving on the outside, too. All of Fritz was in motion, as if... Oh, gross! Mott backed away from the tank, but he couldn't stop looking at Fritz. Not that Fritz was Fritz anymore. Fritz was no longer a goldfish. He no longer had fish scales and fins. No, Fritz was now a mass of squirming sea Bonnnies. All Fritz's own parts had been replaced with the tiny, gelatinous, deformed aquatic rabbits. Mott stared in disbelief and total disgust. As he gaped, he saw a couple of Fritz's scales drifting toward the bottom of the tank. They slowly floated downward until they settled on the rocks. Mott stared at the tiny scales. They were all that was left of the original Fritz. Mott felt like he was going to be sick. Fritz swam behind the cluster of sea Bonnnies, and Mott swallowed bile. He made a face and started to run toward the door, but movement in the tank caught his attention. He glanced back. All the sea Bonnnies were lined up against the glass, staring at him. Mott ran from Rory's room. Mott spent most of the night and the better part of the next day thinking about Fritz. Or, actually, not Fritz. All this thinking time wasn't technically needed because he'd reached a conclusion about the body-snatched fish within an hour of leaving Rory's room. Lying on his back on his bed, he forced himself to think about what he'd seen. After analyzing it from every angle he could think of, he decided what he'd seen was not some new version of Fritz formed out of sea Bonnnies. It was instead a Fritz imposter. It was a mass of sea Bonnnies formed to look like Fritz. Why? Because the sea Bonnnies had consumed Fritz, then used what they ingested to multiply themselves and take Fritz's place. Mott had decided they were kind of like fish-eating nanobots, which then took on the form of the thing they'd eaten. The day after Mott saw not Fritz for the first time, the day was bright and relentlessly sunny. The weather was all wrong for his mood. He thought a stormy day would have better suited his dark thoughts. But no matter. His thoughts weren't distracted by the sunshine. By the time Mott got home from school, he'd reached a conclusion. The sea Bonnnies had to go. Unfortunately, he came to this conclusion too late in the day. If he had worked this out earlier, he could have cut school to come home and flush the nasty things. But now Rory was home, and Mott was going to have to figure out a way to get Rory out of his room. No, out of the house, so Mott could dispose of the sea Bonnnies. Rory now sat at the kitchen counter eating his after-school snack of crackers, cheese, and orange juice. Mott leaned against the counter by the sink and watched his brother shower crumbs all over his blue shirt and the floor. "How about we go outside and toss the ball around?" Mott said. "It's a nice day. Everyone should be outside." "Okay," Rory shouted. "I'll go get my mitt." Shoving his last two crackers in his mouth and trailing crumbs behind him, he scurried out of the kitchen. Once they were outside, Mott started working on a plan to keep Rory out of the house while Mott went back inside and disposed of the sea Bonnnies. Mott had plenty of time to work on his plan because neither he nor Rory were particularly good at throwing or catching. A lot of time was spent running around their big backyard chasing the ball. Mott's house sat on a large lot, which backed up on a green belt. A thick forest of old oak and maple trees hugged the fence line, and gnarled branches reached into the yard to drop leaves. Uneven grass covered most of the yard. It used to be thick green grass, but when Mott's dad started taking longer flights, which kept him away longer, he stopped doing things like fertilizing and trimming. Moles started burrowing under the lawn, and the yard turned lumpy, sort of like not Fritz. Mott squinted up at the sun, which was starting to slide toward the horizon. He needed an excuse soon to keep Rory outside. "Hey, Rory," a child's voice called from the other side of the wooden fence at the north end of the yard. "Hey, Danny," Rory called back. He'd been running after the ball, but he abandoned the task and veered toward the wood slats that separated Rory's domain from Danny's. "Want to come play ball?" Rory shouted. He put his face up to one of the weathered fence boards and peered through a knothole. "Nope," Danny called. "Mom and I are taking Pup for his first walk on a leash. Want to come?" "Yeah!" Rory shouted. He turned to look at Mott. "Can we?" he yelled. He did a typical Rory spastic dance of excitement. Mott grinned. This was perfect. He nodded. "You go ahead. I'll stay here and get started on my homework so I'll have more time to play with you later." "Cool!" Rory shouted. He dropped his mitten and ran toward the gate. "I'll keep an eye on them," Danny's mother called through the fence. "Thanks, Mrs. Fairchild." Mott charged back into the house as soon as Rory slammed the gate shut and started shouting, "What's up, Pup?" Mott had a feeling a walk that included a puppy and two antsy boys wasn't going to be a long one. He needed to hurry. He took the stairs 2 at a time and ran down the hall to Rory's room. Rory's door was open. It always was during the day. Inside the room, Mott went directly to Rory's desk, shoved aside a pile of books, and reached for the fish tank. The sound of splashing water stopped him. He looked in the tank. Its lid was up, probably because Rory had forgotten to close it after he fed his little maniacal creatures. Mott could see both through the glass and from above the water that the sea bonnies were spun up, violently darting this way and that, creating swirls under the water and rough waves on the top. It was as if they knew what he planned to do. Yeah, well, so what? He wasn't going to have to be worried about what they knew and didn't know soon enough. Mott strode to the desk, reached out, and slapped the fish tank lid closed. The water inside the tank churned more wildly. The lid vibrated, like it was going to pop open. Mott smacked his hand down on top of it, then used his other hand to put a book on the lid. He looked around and grabbed one of Rory's t-shirts off the floor, covering the tank with the shirt because he sure didn't want to look at the sea bonnies as he carried them to their deaths. He pulled the tank toward him and lifted it off the desk. The sound of frothing water got louder. He ignored it. The fish tank was a lot heavier than he expected it to be, but he was strong enough to carry it, barely. From this point, he had to go slowly. He walked methodically and steadily toward the bathroom. And when he got there, he set the fish tank on the counter. He flipped on the light and closed the bathroom door. The toilet seat lid opened with a squeak. Mott turned toward the fish tank. He had to take the t-shirt and the book off the tank now. He wished he had rubber gloves. He didn't want a single drop of the water in the fish tank to touch him. Well, he'd just have to be careful. Mott took off the fish tank's lid, inspected it for errant sea bonnies, found none, and set it aside. Then he ever so carefully began pouring the fish tank's water and the sea bonnies into the toilet bowl. He half expected to hear whispering as he poured. Would the sea bonnies beg for their lives? Would they try to make him feel guilty or murderous? He heard nothing. Maybe they were in shock. It was a good thing they didn't try to make him feel bad, because he felt no regret. What he felt was relief, deep and profound relief. He couldn't empty the entire fish tank into the toilet bowl at once, so he started by pouring as much of the water out as he could. While he poured, he flushed. Once he had most of the water gone, he was able to flush the bulk of the sea bonnies together. Then it took one last spill to dump the last of the sea bonnies and pour Not Fritz into the toilet. He watched the remaining sea bonnies and Not Fritz swirl around the toilet bowl, and as soon as they disappeared and clear water refilled the bowl, he did a fist pump. "Yes!" he shouted. He looked inside the fish tank to be sure all the sea bonnies were gone. They weren't. One purplish creature was flopping around on the bottom of the tank. Mott quickly held the fish tank under the bathtub faucet. He let out about an inch of water run into the tank, and he swished it around. Then he dumped this water too. He flushed again, checked the fish tank. No sea bonnies. Moving fast again, Mott grabbed a roll of paper towels from under the sink. He also ran down to the kitchen to get his mom's big stock pot. It had occurred to him, while he was watching the sea bonnies head off to their sewery grave, that he should have a plausible story for why he'd flushed his brother's friends. He'd quickly come up with one. He was going to make it look like he'd been trying to clean the tank, and when he transferred them to the pot, they'd died. Perhaps poisoned by the stainless steel? That should work. Rory wouldn't know any better. His mom probably wouldn't either. And she wouldn't care much. She had other things to think about. Even if Rory pitched a fit and went running to his mommy, his mom wouldn't suspect Mott of deliberately disposing of the sea Bonnnies. She'd just soothe Rory's hurt feelings, and that would be that. Which was almost what happened. The only part of the scenario that didn't play out according to Mott's plan was Rory's reaction. Rory didn't pitch a fit. He didn't throw a tantrum. He didn't go running to his mommy. Instead, he burst into tears, ran into his room, slammed the door, and locked it. Okay, so maybe Mott felt a little bad. He loved his brother, and he didn't want to upset the little guy. Had there been some other way to handle the situation? Mott stood outside his brother's door, asking himself this question as he tried to get Rory to come downstairs for dinner. "I'm really sorry, buddy," he called through the closed door. "I was only trying to help." This much was true. He'd been trying to help himself be free of the sea Bonnnies, for sure, but he also didn't like them being in the same room as his little brother. After all, the loathsome things did chow down on Fritz. They might be dangerous. What if they bit Rory and gave him an infection? "Mom wants you to come down to dinner," Mott called through the closed door. "Go away," Rory yelled. "I'm not here." Okay, Mott said. "Then who's yelling at me?" "Not me," Rory shouted. A chill skittered down Mott's spine. Not me was way too close to not Fritz. The image of a sea bunny infested Rory flashed through Mott's mind. He shuddered and stepped back from the door. "Suit yourself," he called. Mott fell into bed just before 10 p.m., exhausted. Not only had he slept very little the night before, he'd tapped out his energy with all the thinking he'd done during the day, the adrenaline rush of vanquishing his enemies, and the struggle to get Rory to open his bedroom door. The latter part of Mott's day had stretched through the evening. Neither his nor his mom's powers of persuasion had been enough to get Rory to open his door. Eventually, it was Rory's need to pee that got his door open. When he finally came out and emptied his bladder, he made 2 announcements. To his mom, he announced, "I'm hungry." "I bet you are," she said. "That's what happens when you refuse to open your door." She pulled him close. "Why don't you come and climb in bed with me, and you can explain to me why you did what you did, and I can explain to you why you don't get to do that anymore. If we're both satisfied at the end of the conversation, I'll fix you a snack. Deal?" Rory wiped red eyes and nodded. He then turned to Mott and announced, "You're not my brother." "Rory!" his mom admonished. "It's okay, Mom," Mott said. "I get it." To Rory, he said, "I really am sorry." That was only part of a lie. He wasn't sorry he'd flushed the sea Bonnnies, but he was sorry that Rory was upset. Now, Mott lay in the silent house and wondered if Rory had fallen asleep. Rory had still been crying when their mom put him to bed. The house creaked, and outside an owl hooted. Mott turned on his side and looked at his curtain-covered window. His window looked out over the green belt behind the house, and it was right over the roof that covered the back deck. In the summer, he liked to climb out onto the roof and sit in the sun, watching the birds in the trees. It was so peaceful. Mott closed his eyes. He realized he was relaxed for the first time since he'd seen the sea Bonnnies in Rory's tank. He exhaled and went to sleep. As soon as he did, he dropped into a dream. Mott sat at the breakfast table, eating his cornflakes and reading the last of his English literature assignment. Shoveling in his food, keeping his eye on the pages of his book, he spooned up milk and flakes over and over. As he neared the bottom of the bowl, though, he shifted his gaze from the book to the cereal, and that's when he saw them. Instead of seeing flakes floating in his milk, Mott saw sea Bonnnies swimming in formation around his bowl, their squidgy, bluish bodies disgustingly pulsating through the milk. The sea Bonnnies flipped over and looked up at him with itty-bitty black beady eyes. Mott yelled, gagged, and shoved the bowl away from him. "No!" Mott's yell followed him out of his dream and into his waking state. He thrashed free of his covers and sat up. The hair on his arms were sticking out, and his heart was pounding hard and fast and loud in his chest. He felt a dry heave come up. He swallowed it down. He started to retch, and he sprang out of his bed and rushed to the bathroom. Afraid his cry might have pulled his mom from a deep sleep, Mott didn't turn on the bathroom light. He didn't want her to worry. He groped in the dark for a glass he knew was next to the sink, ran tap water into the glass, and started chugging it down. Halfway through the glass, the water going down Mott's throat suddenly felt clumpy, like it had thickened, or it suddenly had something in it, like a glob of noodles in a bowl of chicken soup. Choking and sputtering, he dropped the glass as he reached for the light. The light came on just as the glass landed in the sink and cracked. Mott quickly shut the bathroom door and scooped up the glass to examine it closely. Holding the glass up to the light, he inspected the water droplets caught in the inside curve. Was anything swimming in the drops? He also studied the crack. Was anything caught in it? He saw nothing but water. Sitting on the closed toilet seat, he thought about what he'd felt in his throat. Had he really felt something, or was he just swallowing wrong? Maybe there had been some toothpaste in the glass, or maybe his mind had conjured up the sensation because of his dream. Given what he'd done that day, it was easy to assume he'd imagined feeling something slimy slip down his throat. As freaked out as he was by the sea Bonnnies, it was surprising he could even think about drinking water. Mott picked up the cracked glass and looked at it again. Nope, still nothing. Mott blew out a sigh and headed back into his room. When he opened his eyes the next morning, Mott's logic faced its first foe. His stomach was cramping so badly he could barely get out of bed and go to the bathroom to pee. And when he was done with that, it was all he could do to get back into bed, curl onto his side, clutch his stomach, and moan. That's where his mother found him when she came in to be sure he was up. "Rise and shine," she called out. "It's, Mott?" She rushed to the side of the bed. "What's wrong?" She felt his forehead. Mott hesitated. "I'm not sure. I have stomach cramps, like big ones. I must have eaten something bad last night." His mom frowned at him. "What did you eat that we didn't eat?" That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Mott thought. "All I had yesterday was what you made me for lunch and what we had for dinner." As far as food went, that was the truth. He wasn't about to tell her about thinking he'd swallowed a sea Bonnie. That opened a can of worms, or sea Bonnies, he didn't want to get into. "I'll go get something for your stomach," his mom said, "and I'll check on Rory to be sure he's okay. Maybe he's sick too, and that's why he was so upset about the sea Bonnies last night." Mott opened his mouth to respond, but another wave of cramping gripped his intestines. And right on the heels of that, the whispers returned.
Wuss!
The little whispers flung at him.
Can't handle swallowing just one. What do you think 100 would feel like? 200. 2,000.
The whispers morphed into what sounded like hushed giggles, thousands of them. Mott closed his eyes and pressed his lips together. "I'll be right back," his mom said. He heard his mom's footfalls tap across the floor. She was already dressed for work, wearing her high heels. She must have an event today. And here he was making trouble for her. Mott tried to concentrate on his breathing, but between the cramping and the whispers, he couldn't stay focused on it. He couldn't decide which was worse, the horrible cramping or the eerie and relentless whispers.
Serves you right.
The whispers were saying now.
Every bad deed gets punished.
Mott's mom reappeared with the chalky medicine she always gave him when his stomach was upset. "Rory's fine," she said, pouring Mott a dose. He swallowed it dutifully. "But he had a peanut butter sandwich yesterday," his mom said. "I gave you the rest of the lunch meat. It must have gone bad. I'm so sorry, honey." "It's not your fault, Mom," he said, absolutely meaning it. He had no doubt whatsoever that the way he felt had nothing to do with bad lunch meat. It had to do with what had gone down his throat last night. He was sure of it. Convincing himself he'd swallowed Rory's toothpaste had been wishful thinking.
You're not as stupid as you look,
the whispering voices said. Mott looked up at his mom. "I think I just need to go back to sleep. Maybe when I wake up, I'll feel better." He was lying now, to both himself and his mom. Are you sure I could, she chewed on her lower lip, have someone else run the event? No, Mom, you don't need to do that. I'll be fine. She felt his forehead again. You're not hot. In fact, you're kind of on the cool side. Chocolate milk! Rory shouted from the hallway. I want chocolate milk for breakfast! Mott cringed at the volume. His mom gave him a half smile. Well, apparently he's gotten over his upset. Good, Mott said. Mom! Rory yelled. I'm coming, she called. She looked at Mott one more time. You're sure you... I'll be fine, he lied again. He wasn't at all sure he was going to be fine. The cramps were starting to feel more intense, and the voices were getting more insistent. The whispering wasn't a unison murmur anymore. It was more like the garbled hissing of hundreds of voices all muttering at once. He could no longer make out whole phrases, but he caught a word here and there.
Stupid
Was used frequently. He also heard
guilty
and
murderer
a few times. Once he was sure he heard
milksop.
Did you hear me? His mom asked. What? Mott curled up tighter as a new spasm clutched at his belly. I said that if you don't feel better when you wake up, be sure to call Ron. I'm going to get on the phone with him before I leave and tell him you might be needing him. Ron was Dr. T. He was actually a good idea. Mott said so, and then he closed his mouth on the groan that wanted to erupt into the room. In the hallway, Rory shouted, I'm starving! His mom leaned over and kissed Mott on the forehead. Sleep, honey. You'll feel better soon. She crossed to the door, gave him one last look, and left the room. He heard her talking softly to Rory in the hallway. Then he heard Rory's footsteps pounding down the stairs, and his mom's tapping heels after that. Mott closed his eyes and tried to sleep. Tried being the operative word. When Mott looked at his bedside digital clock for the 761st time, okay, maybe he hadn't looked quite that many times, but close, at 1:37 in the afternoon, precisely, he gave up trying to convince himself he was going to feel better soon. It just wasn't going to happen. At 1:38, he got up and went into the bathroom. He thought maybe if he could use the toilet, he'd feel better. 5 minutes later, he was back in his bedroom, and he wasn't feeling better. Moaning, he changed into sweats, a t-shirt, and some athletic shoes. He called Dr. T's clinic. Claudia, Dr. T's receptionist, answered. Mott could picture her holding the phone as they spoke. Large and cushy, with wildly curly hair and kind hazel eyes. Claudia was a caring woman, Mott had known as long as he'd known Dr. T. She immediately put Dr. T on the phone. Can you get over here on your own? Dr. T asked. I think I can bike over. Mott struggled to get out. His hesitations weren't entirely caused by stomach cramps. The whispers were getting louder, and they were as distracting as all get out. What he was hearing sounded kind of like someone quickly scanning through radio stations. However, he was hearing snatches of words and phrases instead of snatches of songs. None of them were anything he wanted to listen to. In about 15 minutes, Dr. T said. I'm sorry, what? I said your voice and your hesitations aren't giving me a lot of confidence in your biking abilities. Claudia's going on her lunch break, and she said she'll swing over to get you. She'll be there in about 15 minutes. Oh, I don't want to. Don't argue with your doctor, Dr. T said. He chuckled. Mott sighed. Thank you. One of the voices whispered.
Sucker.
Dr. T had exam rooms designed to please the various age groups he focused on. He had some for the little kids, the grade school kids, and the teens. Unfortunately, because Dr. T was squeezing in Mott between other patients, Mott landed in a little kid room. So when he lay on his back, he was staring up at a ceiling painted with sparkly rainbows, flying purple pigs, and a blue-tinged Pegasus that at the moment resembled a sea bunny far more than it should have. It must have been the wings, which looked vaguely like bunny ears, and that purplish blue color. He never really wanted to see that color again. Mott quickly looked away from the ceiling, turning his head to gaze at the room's walls. They were painted yellow and covered with animal stencils. Pretty much every imaginable animal had a spot on the room, including a rabbit, which Mott could have sworn was staring at him with animosity. Mott closed his eyes. The paper beneath him crinkled as he shifted to find a semi-comfortable position, while Dr. T prodded his belly. Every time Dr. T asked, "Does this hurt?" Mott gasped, "Yes." Dr. T stepped back and sat on his rolling stool. Mott heard the vinyl squeak and the rollers rattle as Dr. T scooted over to the laptop he'd set up at a small counter next to the exam table. Dr. T was kind of a funny-looking guy. This was mostly caused by his big ears and his equally large nose. But a goatee that came to a point under his chin contributed too. On top of these eye-catching features, he was short and totally bald. When Mott and Nate were 10, Dr. T shaved what little remained of his light brown hair. He looked a bit like one of the 7 dwarves, or maybe a gnome. He might have been one of the nicest people Mott had ever met, though. Even nicer than Mott's mom. His mom occasionally lost her temper. Dr. T never did. Mott tried to concentrate on how nice Dr. T was, but the whispered voices got louder. He was now hearing more full sentences.
You don't know what you're dealing with.
For example, came through clearly. Mott tried to keep his breathing steady while he watched Dr. T type. He felt sweat trickle down between his shoulder blades and he squirmed. He was attempting to stay calm, but these cramps and the relentless whispers were terrifying. What was happening inside his body? Mott abruptly rose up on an elbow. He glanced at his belly and he frowned. Did his belly look lumpy? He thought it did. Okay, Dr. T said. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to get Louise in here to draw some blood. The blood tests will tell me if you have an infection. Once she's done with that, Louise will also do an ultrasound. That will tell me if we're looking at a gallbladder issue, which is a possibility. Mott nodded. He didn't bother to ask questions about his gallbladder. He pointed at his belly. Do you think my stomach looks lumpy? I think it looks lumpy. Dr. T stood and looked down at Mott's stomach. It looks normal to me, and I didn't find any masses. Mott frowned. Okay. Dr. T patted Mott's thigh. When you feel like crap, it's easy for the mind to start imagining all kinds of worst-case scenarios. So let's start with your treatment right away, even while we get the tests set up. What treatment? Dr. T flipped his computer screen, turning it into a tablet. He tapped the screen and handed it to Mott. Watch this. Louise will be in here in a few minutes to draw blood and do the ultrasound. Dr. T pressed a button, and the upper part of the table Mott lay on raised a little. That work? Mott nodded. He took the tablet. Dr. T patted his leg again. I'll be back after I look at your tests. In the meantime, he pointed at the tablet screen Mott held. Watch that. Dr. T strode from the room, closing the door behind him. Mott, cringing at another round of cramping, looked at the screen. It was frozen on a video of a stand-up comic routine. He managed to half smile and shook his head. Leave it to Dr. T to prescribe laughter. Maybe the laughter helped. Mott had been tempted to set aside Dr. T's tablet and just be miserable while he waited for Louise. But 2 more intense cramps and a whispered,
Your time is coming,
got him to hit play on the screen. He hadn't heard of the comedian in the video, but he was really funny. Mott managed to chuckle at first, and then he was actually laughing so hard that Louise, a small dark-haired woman in a ponytail, had to pause the video while she took blood. She let him watch again while she did the ultrasound, which she did silently. After a few minutes of feeling her pressing her magic wand, as she called it, all over his stomach, Mott asked, Do you see anything? I don't, kiddo, she said. But we'll have Dr. T come in and give a look-see to be sure. The look-see came quickly. Dr. T studied the scan and grinned at Mott. Everything looks normal. Really? Mott frowned. Then why do I feel so bad? Honestly, I'm not 100% sure, but my guess is you have food poisoning. I'll know more when I get your blood work, but nothing horrible is going on. Mott nodded. Okay. Dr. T squeezed his shoulder. Your enthusiasm is overwhelming, he chuckled. How about this? Why don't you get dressed and go hang out on the sofa in my office? I have a couple more patients to see. Then I'm heading home. I'll give you a ride. Mott nodded again. When Dr. T and Louise left the room, Mott sat up on the edge of the exam table and took in what Dr. T had said. He tried believing it. You're fine, he told himself out loud.
Liar, liar, pants on fire,
the whispers countered. Mott shook his head and stood up to get dressed. You're not real, he said to the whispers. I'm fine. Although he could have sworn that he heard sibilant laughter in his head, Mott ignored it and got dressed. Strangely, the cramping had abated a little. Maybe it was the laughter. Maybe it was more likely the power of suggestion. He was comforted by the results of the ultrasound. If something foreign had been in his belly, the scan would have found it. Right? Right. Mott was able to walk semi-normally down the clinic's hallway. Behind the purple and white striped door of exam room 2, near Dr. T's office, a little girl giggled. Mott smiled. It was a nice sound, much nicer than the poisonous murmurs in his head. He pushed open the door of Dr. T's office and dropped onto Dr. T's overstuffed blue and yellow polka dot couch. Listening to the continued giggling, he fell asleep. He woke only long enough for Dr. T to walk him out to Dr. T's new SUV and get him home. Then he went up to his bed, and he fell back asleep. When Mott woke up, it was dark. But the dark wasn't nighttime dark. It was pre-dawn dark. He sat up. He'd slept for over 12 hours. Taking stock, he realized he felt okay. His stomach was sore, but he wasn't cramping like before. The whispers were still in his head, but they seemed muted. Fumbling for his small bedside lamp, Mott switched it on. As soon as the light poured onto his nightstand, he saw a bottle of water, several crackers in a plastic bag, and a note. He picked up the note. Mott, you were sleeping soundly, and Ron said that was the best thing for you, so I didn't wake you. I've left you some crackers in case you wake up hungry. If you need me, come and get me. I love you, Mom. Mott smiled and reached for the bottled water. He was really thirsty, so he quickly unscrewed the lid. He started to bring the bottle to his lips, but then he stopped. He held the bottle under the glow of his lamp, and he studied it. He rolled his eyes. It was just water. Bottled water in a sealed container. It was fine. He drank some water and he reached for the crackers. Leaning back on his pillows, he opened the plastic bag and plucked out a whole wheat cracker. Munching on it, he looked around his semi-dark room, at the nature posters and photos of his favorite baseball stadiums, at the shelves full of video games and math puzzle books, at the closet he knew was stuffed with his clothes and hiking and fishing gear. He took comfort in being reminded of who he was. He wasn't Mott, a boy infested by sea Bonnnies. He was Mott, lover of baseball and video games and math and camping out, best friend to Nate and Lyle, a good brother to Rory, and maybe soon-to-be boyfriend to Teresa. He was a normal teen.
You're a freak.
The whispers countered. Yeah, and you're not real, he told them. In the light of this new day, it felt even more true. He shook his head. Sea Bonnnies couldn't even hatch without purified water above 75 degrees. How were they going to survive his stomach acid? He chuckled as he kept munching on crackers and looking around his room. Over Mott's desk, opposite his bed, he had a dark green bulletin board covered in photos. The photos represented his favorite things and best memories. The one in the middle was a picture of him and his dad sitting in a rowboat in the middle of the lake where his family had a summer cabin. His dad always got a couple weeks off in July, and they went to the cabin to swim and hike and fish. Mott usually felt disconnected from his dad, but when they fished, he felt close to fish. Mott dropped his half-eaten cracker and sat up. His reminiscing had reminded him of Fritz, the fish that was no longer a fish when Mott flushed it down the toilet with the sea Bonnnies. He hadn't imagined the way not Fritz had looked when Mott had last seen him. He might have been imagining the whispers, but he'd seen what he'd seen. Fritz had been eaten from the inside out and replaced by sea Bonnnies. He was pretty sure fish had stomach acid too, and yet the sea Bonnnies still managed to get him. Mott looked down at his belly. Setting aside the plate, he raised his shirt with a trembling hand. He put his palm against it. What? It was normal, wasn't it? Mott thought about how horrible he'd felt the day before and how he felt now. He'd assumed the end of his cramps was a good thing, but what if all that meant was that the sea Bonnnies had finished their work on his stomach? Maybe he felt better because his belly was no longer being consumed. It was now something else. His not belly. Mott gingerly felt all over his stomach. Did it feel different than it used to? More gelatinous? Mott groaned and swiped the bag of crackers off his lap. They hit the floor with a muffled crunch, and Mott slid all the way under his covers, pulling them up over his head. He wanted to escape, to hide from the world. No, what he wanted was to hide from the sea Bonnnies, and from himself.
You can't hide,
The whispers told him. Yeah, Mott said. Watch me. Mott covered his ears and started humming. That's where his mom found him, under his covers, humming like a little kid, when she came into his room, still in her robe, to check on him. Mott? He threw back the covers and looked at her. Apparently, he looked worse than he felt. As soon as her gaze landed on his face, she frowned and said, "You're staying home again today." He didn't argue with her. After his mom and Rory left the house, Mott dropped back into sleep, but he didn't stay asleep for long. This was unfortunate, because as soon as he was awake, his mind was inundated by the whispers again. The whispers in Mott's head, however, were no longer whispers. They were full-on shouts. If he didn't drown them out, he was going to lose his mind. Mott threw back his covers and dashed to his desk to get his earbuds. Putting them in, he started filling his ears with driving rock music. He could still hear the shouts. What could he do? He looked around, his gaze landing on his shelves. He reached out and picked up one of the handheld video games. He got back under the covers, and he turned on the game. Mott spent the better part of the day trying to drown out the shouts, but not even deafening rock music and fast-moving video games could beat them down. Then, sometime during the afternoon, maybe a little after 2 p.m., Mott started feeling odd. When he stopped his game to figure out why he felt that way, he realized he had a strange vibration in his chest and belly. It was like the very faintest suggestion of movement, as if something was shaking his organs from the inside. He felt like his heart was quivering, and his lungs felt curiously unstable every time he took a breath. Like instead of expanding and contracting, they kind of wiggled, struggling not to collapse. He couldn't stand it anymore. He had to get another scan. Mott picked up the phone and called Dr. T's cell phone. He didn't want to go through Claudia. "Hello, this is Dr. Tabor." Mott gripped the phone. "Dr. T, this is Mott." "Hey, Mott, how you feeling this morning?" That's the thing. I still feel weird." "Still cramping?" "No, not so much cramping as, like shaking on the inside. Like my organs are, trembling." For 4 seconds, Mott counted. The only thing he heard through the phone was the faintest of hisses in the line. Then Dr. T said, "Let's do this. I'm on my way over to the hospital to visit a couple patients before I head home for a while. I need to go back in late tonight to work on inventory with Claudia, so I'm leaving the clinic early. Why don't I stop by and get you? We'll see if we can squeeze you in for a CAT scan. Shouldn't be a problem. Given what you're telling me, I can get insurance approval for it. Do you want me to talk to your mom before I come over?" "I'll do it," Mott said quickly. He didn't want to worry his mother. Dr. T was quiet for another few seconds. "Okay, I'll talk to her later, after the scan." "That would be good." As soon as he hung up the phone, Mott scribbled a note for his mom on the back of the note she'd left for him, just in case she got home before he did. The note was filled with lies, but the truth was out of the question. What was he supposed to write? "Mom, I've gone to get a scan to see if sea bunnies are eating me from the inside out." No, that wouldn't be a good idea. He settled with an evasive lie. "Mom, I'm feeling better. Gone out to get some fresh air. We'll call later. Love you, Mott." Mott sat in front of Dr. T's small oak desk in his clinic's office. Dr. T was on the phone talking to another doctor, one who had analyzed the CAT scan. Mott wasn't listening to what Dr. T was saying. He didn't really care at this point. He'd already heard enough from Dr. T himself. Now he was just trying to stay calm. So he was leaning forward, his elbows on his knees, and he was staring at his shoes. There was a brown speck on one of his white athletic shoes. He was using it as a focal point, concentrating on it the way a seasoned meditator might stare at a candle. He wondered if he should try a mantra or maybe an om. He needed something to tether him to sanity because the facts were dragging him quickly towards madness. Apparently, the scan had revealed abnormalities in Mott's stomach, intestines, lungs, and heart. They looked variegated in a way that was inconsistent with normal tissue. Dr. T and the other doctor were now discussing potential causes of the abnormalities. Were they tumors? Were they evidence of some sort of systemic infection? No and no. The doctors knew of no biological cause that could be responsible for the scan's results. Mott didn't care about the discussion because he already knew what had caused the variegated appearance of his organs. He'd seen it as soon as Dr. T had shown Mott his scan. Here's what the CAT scan revealed. Dr. T had said, tapping a few keys on his laptop to bring up the image of Mott's scan. Dr. T had pointed to light-colored lumps clustered together all through Mott's intestines, his stomach, his lungs, and his heart. The clumps were grayish-white, and they had small dark specks sprinkled throughout. At first glance, the specks appeared to be random, but when Mott had leaned in closer to Dr. T's computer screen, it was obvious the specks weren't haphazard. No, the specks came in pairs, and they weren't specks. They were eyes. If you really studied the clumps, you could see they were made up of elongated forms, each vaguely rabbit-shaped, each with 2 dark dots. Mott had almost thrown up when he'd seen the truth of what was going on inside him, but for some reason, he hadn't been able to. He gagged, but nothing had come up. Dr. T hung up the phone, steepled his fingers, and looked at Mott across his desk. Dr. Jenkins and I agree that the scan's abnormalities don't fit anything seen before. That's a good thing. It means that the scan's results are likely caused by an issue with the scan itself, interference with the machine. He suggested we repeat the scan tomorrow, and I think that's a good idea. Mott tore his gaze away from the brown spot on his shoe. He looked at Dr. T. Ignoring the rippling sensation that he felt in his chest, he said, "We don't need to repeat the scan. I know what it is." He was shocked by how calm he sounded. His words were totally flat. Too flat, actually. He sounded a little like a robot, but that was just because he was too stunned to bother with putting inflection in his words. Dr. T frowned at Mott. "What do you think it is, Mott? Is there something you haven't told me?" Mott figured Dr. T thought Mott had taken something he shouldn't have taken. In a way, he had, but not on purpose. Mott shook his head. "No. I mean, yes, but it's not what you think." Dr. T raised his eyebrows and waited. "The thing is," Mott said, scooting forward in his seat, "a few days ago, Rory got some sea Bonnnies from Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria." Dr. T frowned a question. "They're kind of like sea monkeys," Mott said. "You know, those brine shrimp things?" Dr. T nodded. "A couple days after they hatched," Mott continued, "I noticed that Fritz, Rory's goldfish, which shared a tank with the sea Bonnnies, didn't look right. When I really looked at him closely, I saw that he was no longer a goldfish. It was like the sea Bonnnies had eaten him from the inside out, infested him." Mott could tell from Dr. T's blank expression that Mott was losing him. When Dr. T opened his mouth to speak, Mott started talking faster, almost running his words together the same way Rory did when he got excited. "That's what made me realize I had to get rid of the things, which I did. I flushed them, and Rory was all upset. But later that night, I got a drink of water, and I felt something go down my throat, and I tried to convince myself it wasn't a sea Bonnie, but now I think it was. And I think it started eating my tissue. And it multiplied, and now my insides are turning into sea Bonnies, the same way Fritz turned into sea Bonnies. They're eating me from the inside, and they're coming together to replace my organs. I think that's why I feel so weird on the inside, like I'm jiggling from within, like gelatin sort of, but not exactly." Mott stopped talking. He concentrated on breathing in and out, which, for obvious reasons, was becoming harder than usual. He tried not to think about masses of sea Bonnies roiling around together to form the walls of his lungs. Dr. T took a deep breath. "It's time to call your mom." Mott slumped in the chair. Several hours later, near midnight, Mott sat on the edge of his bed. Once again, he was staring at the brown spot on his shoe. He'd been staring at his shoe for a long time, an abnormally long time. He was staring at it mostly because he didn't know what else to do. He stared at it through the better part of the evening, listening to Rory chatter at his mom, listening to his mom trying to get Rory to calm down and go to bed, listening to Rory finally settle into his room, listening to his mom's footsteps pause outside Mott's door, and then continue on to her room. Obviously, she'd decided to deal with him in the morning. Outside, thunder rumbled. Finally, the weather suited the situation. When they left the clinic earlier in the evening, Mott had noticed the ozone smell in the air, and he'd turned his face up to the soft rain starting to fall. For an instant, it had soothed him, but just for an instant. A streak of jagged lightning on the horizon had brought him back to his intolerable reality. Nothing he was facing could be eased by a little bit of rain. Now the rain matched how Mott felt. It wasn't soft or soothing. It was angry and insistent. He could hear it thrumming on the roof, assaulting the house like thousands of jackhammers, trying to drill through the shingles. When Mott's mom had brought him home and asked him to go up to his room, she'd followed him as far as his doorway. Then she said, in a strained voice she used when she was trying to remain calm but wanted to scream hysterically, "Please stay in here. We'll talk later." For hours, Mott had been thinking about what that talk would be like. How would he convince her he wasn't crazy? Did he even want to try? Wouldn't it be better if he was crazy? When you weighed the pros and cons, crazy was definitely the preferred scenario. If he was crazy, the worst that could happen was that he might get put in a mental hospital for a while. Maybe he'd have to go through group therapy, talk about his feelings, and eat yucky tapioca pudding. He'd be Mott, made up of his own parts. A human. Normal. The alternative to crazy was being not Mott. Absolutely unable to forget what not Fritz had looked like, Mott knew that when the sea Bonnnies were done with him, if they were consuming him from the inside, Mott wouldn't be anything remotely resembling a human. And that meant Mott's life would be over. He wanted to convince himself he was going crazy. He really did. But the problem with that was the CAT scan. He wasn't the only person who'd seen something weird on the scan. Dr. T had seen it, and so had the other doctor. They hadn't seen sea Bonnnies, of course, because their minds didn't let them entertain something so absurd, something so outside the bounds of what science understood to be possible. But they had seen something. Mott wasn't imagining the physical changes in his body. This was a very worrying fact. Mott felt an inch on his forearm, and he idly scratched it. It still itched. He scratched harder. When the spot kept itching, he looked down at his arm. And there, where it itched, something moved just under his skin. Mott stood up so fast he got dizzy and immediately collapsed back onto the bed. He swallowed hard and stared at his arm. Yes, there, the faintest of elongated lumps were slithering under the surface of his skin. Mott groaned. His whole forearm started to itch, and he scratched at it so hard that he broke the skin. In horror, he stared at the blood welling up. Flickering up through that blood, the tail of a sea Bonnnie squirmed in the thick redness. His eyes nearly bugged out of his head. Mott watched the sea Bonnnie tail disappear as the sea Bonnnie dove back down under his skin. If he could have sawed his arm off and thrown it away, he would have. His whole arm itched now, and he could see that the movement was all up and down his arm. Not only that, his skin was changing color. Right in front of his eyes, his skin was losing its normal pigment. It was becoming translucent, and it was turning a pale shade of purple-blue. Mott looked at his other arm. The same thing was happening to it. For several seconds, Mott didn't move. Not at all. He wasn't even sure he was breathing. He became a statue, a frozen collection of mutating cells overseen by a brain incapable of accepting the impossible transformation. Because this had to be impossible. He could not be sitting here watching sea Bonnnies eat his skin from underneath. He was not seeing them take bite after bite of his cells, ingesting and integrating what used to be part of him, and turning it into more of them. He was not being devoured and replaced by sea Bonnnies. This was not real. Maybe there was something wrong with his eyes. Maybe he was hallucinating. Suddenly able to move, as if released from some paralytic drug or an evil magic spell, Mott jumped to his feet and ran to his dresser. Leaning over the top of it, pushing aside his deodorant and his hairbrush, he peered into his own eyes in the mirror, and he saw a sea Bonnnie swim through the white surrounding his left iris. Then he saw two wind around the darker flecks of the brown in his right iris. Mott lost what was left of his grip on reality. He ran for his door, intending to flee the house, but he stopped when he heard his mother's voice in the hallway. He couldn't face her like this. What if he infected her? He needed to get back to Dr. T. Now that it was obvious what was happening to Mott, maybe Dr. T could help him. Dr. T had said he was going back to his clinic to work that night. Mott had to get to the clinic. Mott whirled and raced to his window. Throwing it open, he popped the screen and climbed out into the night, onto the roof of the deck. Immediately, the rain stung his skin and his eyes. He didn't care. He crawled quickly to the edge of the porch roof, and he bent over to grab the top of the downspout, not concerned about cutting his hands. Mott wrapped them around the metal and swung his legs over the edge of the roof. Grasping the gutter spout with his arms and legs, he slid down it like a fireman's pole. and he hit the ground hard. His ankle turned, and pain shot up his leg, but he ignored it. He also ignored the pain throbbing in his hands. Mott looked out into the darkness extending behind his house. Why hadn't he brought a flashlight? Well, maybe because he was a little distracted by being eaten by sea bonnies. That was a reasonable excuse. Between the night and the rain coming down in almost solid walls of water, it was nearly impossible to see. That was okay. He knew his yard. He knew the forest behind it. He'd find his way. He could have gone out to the sidewalk where streetlights could show him the way, but he didn't want to be by the street. There were too many cars with bright headlight beams he didn't want to be caught in. So Mott sloshed through the grass in his yard, and he scaled the fence at the back. He figured he could follow the green belt through his neighborhood. He knew if he stuck to the relatively narrow bend of trees, they'd eventually lead him back to Dr. T's clinic. It was just a mile or so away. He could walk it. Mott was so drenched by the time he reached the trees that his clothes clung to him like they were part of him. Or maybe they were part of the sea bonnies now. Light from the houses along the green belt reached into the forest, enough so Mott could see that the ground was covered with standing water. Huge puddles had formed in the spongy loam under the old trees. The water was getting caught up in the depressions between vast root systems stretching through the underbrush. Mott ran through the puddles and stumbled over knobby roots, occasionally falling against a rough tree trunk. As he ran, he scratched his arms, which still itched incessantly, intensely. He couldn't stop digging at himself. Not long after Mott left his house, he didn't know how long because time was becoming something that made no sense to him. Mott scratched hard at his bicep, and when he pulled his hand away, he saw, in the yellow glow from someone's porch light, that he'd torn out a huge chunk of his own flesh. No, not his own flesh. When Mott looked at what he held in his hand, he recoiled, staggering back into the branches of an old oak tree. Instead of embracing him, the twigs prodded and speared him, but that didn't matter. Nothing mattered but the fact that Mott was holding a handful of madly swimming sea bonnies instead of the flesh he thought he'd pulled away from his arm. Sickened, Mott flung the swimming creatures to the ground. He started to hurry on, but he noticed the sea bonnies were swimming energetically, coming together in an organized school to follow the rivulets from one puddle to the next. He stopped and stared, then realized they were swimming after him. They were pursuing him. Mott took off. He started reeling through the trees, zigging this way and that, not just to avoid the trees, but to evade the sea bonnies coming after him. He wished he could hear them advancing, so he knew where they were. He knew better than to stop and turn to see them. They'd catch up if he did. But he couldn't hear them. Mott could hear nothing but the staccato rhythm of the rain and his own rapid breathing. He managed about 10 ungainly strides over the uneven ground before he tripped and went down onto one knee. As soon as he did, the sea bonnies were there. He couldn't see them, but he could feel them. They immediately swam up his jeans and found their way to his arm, where they reattached themselves. Mott could feel his body reabsorbing the wriggling creatures. He also realized he could feel the sea bonnies all through his body now. They were in every vein, every artery, every organ, every nerve, every system in his entire body. They were everywhere. Mott turned his face to the sky and he screamed. He screamed out of fear, his disbelief, and his rage. He screamed at the insanity of it all. He screamed because what else could he do but scream? He didn't know how to fight this battle. He didn't understand it. He couldn't even believe it. He was also pretty sure he'd already lost it. But then again, maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe Dr. T could help him. Mott had to get to the clinic. Mott started running again, squinting to see through the rain and the trees. He wiped his eyes, but instead of clearing his vision, he just swiped away another glop of sea bonnies. He flicked it off his fingers, and in the glow of someone's pool lights, he could see it hit a tree branch. Immediately, the sea bonnie slithered down the trunk, found a narrow channel of water between two roots, and followed it back to Mott. He felt the sea bonnie slip up his shin as he kept running. Finally, Mott reached the end of the green belt. He careened off one last tree, and he stepped out onto the rain-pounded sidewalk that led to the back door of the clinic. No, that wasn't right. He didn't actually step out. He flopped out. He couldn't step anymore because he was constantly coming apart. With every motion he made, pieces of his flesh fell away and turned into a heaving swell of sea bonnies, which swam chaotically and then coalesced into a formation that once again sought their fellows. And they, of course, were in Mott. Not Mott. Mott wasn't Mott anymore, and he knew it. He tried to dismantle himself. He pulled at his cheeks, at his ears, at his arms, at his chest, at his hips. He tore off handfuls of his flesh and tissue, throwing them aside. He realized some remote part of his brain, maybe a part not yet infested by sea bunnies, thought that if he could tear enough of himself away, he might unearth a few cells of Mott that were still Mott. But each time Mott discarded parts of himself, the parts became determined masses of sea bunnies that doggedly found a way back to him, reattaching and reassimilating faster each time he tried to toss them. They were now doing that so powerfully that Mott even heard a sound when they came rushing back to him. It was a slurp, kind of like sucking the last bit of milkshake up through a straw. But that description was too benign. The sea bunnies weren't benign. They were malevolent, through and through. All the sea bunnies wanted to do was vanquish every aspect of Mott. They wanted to vanquish him and conquer him. They wanted to be more than a colony. They wanted to be an empire formerly known as Mott. No matter what Mott did to resist them, the sea bunnies retaliated and resurged. They filled back in every hole created by his self-demolition efforts. When the chunks of flesh Mott lobbed away hit the ground, they immediately separated into swimming sea bunnies, which began returning to Mott. To get to him, they followed the standing water on the ground. They used the puddles. They even took advantage of falling raindrops. Any and all water became a conduit leading the sea bunnies back to Mott. Once they reached him, the sea bunnies sought any ingress they could find. They swam up his pant legs. They slithered around his shirt. They wriggled over his shoes. They returned to themselves and their version of Mott every single time. As Mott fought this battle, he'd managed to get around the outside of the clinic. He was now close to the front door, collapsing every few seconds as he attempted to extract parts of himself only to have them reform immediately afterwards. Mott realized he had very little time left. He realized his thoughts were not really thoughts anymore, they were fragments. He was having trouble thinking of the people he cared about. His mom, Rory, his friends, and Teresa. He tried to conjure images of them in his head, but he could only see pieces of them. Soon, he'd no longer be anything like what he used to be. How much time did he have? Maybe minutes? Maybe seconds? Of the trillions of cells that had originally made up Mott, he figured only a few thousand were still as they'd been before the sea bunny invasion. Mott managed the last few feet to the clinic door. He reached for it, only to have his hand disintegrate in front of him and drop to the wet concrete. Claudia looked up from her computer screen, out through the darkened waiting room to the blackness beyond the clinic's windows. The clinic was hushed and still, and perhaps because it was so quiet, in spite of the storm, she could hear something odd outside. It was kind of like a splashing sound, but not a normal rain spattering the ground sound. It was a bigger sound than that. It sounded like something large and squishy was falling into a body of water now and then. What Claudia heard between the splashes was odd too. She heard a sort of suctioning sound, almost a whistling. This was similar to the weird noise her vacuum made whenever she accidentally sucked up something wet. After the third time she heard that sound, Claudia decided to look outside the clinic to see what might be causing the peculiar noises. Making sure her computer was secure, Claudia stood and walked through the hushed waiting room. Hesitating for a couple seconds by the door, and not sure why, Claudia eventually pushed the heavy glass door open. She peered out into the deluge and saw Mott. Mott stood there as if standing in heavy rain was a perfectly normal thing to do. The rain sluiced over his brown hair, which was matted to his head. It ran down his face and it pattered against his clothing. Claudia wasn't sure what to make of this. She decided to act the same way Mott was acting, as if everything was normal. "Well, hello, Mott," Claudia said. She kept her expression neutral. Claudia had known Mott since he was a baby. He was a nice boy, never a problem at the clinic. He'd been in yesterday and this morning. She didn't know why. Dr. T didn't discuss his patients with Claudia, even when the patient was almost part of the family. Mott didn't look particularly healthy, though. He had an unnatural bluish tint, and he was so pale he was almost see-through. When Mott didn't respond to her, Claudia asked, "Are you okay?" Suddenly, Mott smiled. "Yes, it's a nice day. Everyone should be outside." Again, Claudia was a little nonplussed. She leaned forward to look at Mott's eyes. She was checking to see if his pupils looked okay. They did. She smiled at him. He smiled back. Then he turned and walked away into the rain. Claudia tried to see where he was going. She thought maybe she should call him back. but it was too late. The rain was coming down so relentlessly that once Spot was a few feet away, he seemed to disappear. As odd as the concept is, and as much as it's gotten flamed online, I like it. I think it's charming for how weird yet creepy it is. But let me know what you think. Now, before we cover our last story, we're bringing back the Cryptid tier list once more. We've done this last Halloween and those vids flopped, so I've been doing this whenever I can. Last time was for St. Patty's Day, and with demonic rabbits, I found it only fitting to do so here as well. Since rabbits are a type of meat, I imagine I may like it. Hard to say since I've never tried rabbit though. Regardless, I would put it in A tier, but with the demonic bits as well, we'll drop it down to B tier. Personally, I imagine the added demonic stuff would not agree with my system well, and I'm not looking forward to being stuck on the old porcelain throne for God knows how long. And speaking of God, here's our last story. This is a story about a man. This man, birthed of an immaculate conception, began performing miracles, helping all he could, and proclaiming himself as the Son of God. Some believed he truly was, but others thought this was heresy by the truest form of the word. These people made this man suffer. Despite all the good he was doing, the people hurt him, beat him, tortured him, and eventually crucified him. Such a barbaric method of death. This man, however, accepted his death with open arms, quite literally, and died for all of our sins, cleansing the world in the eyes of God. The vile men who killed him thought they were the shit, but 3 days later, they found his tomb empty. This man, against all logic, rose from the dead, proving to be the real deal Son of God. This is the story of Jesus Christ, and this is what Easter is all about. Now, you can believe whatever you want. I personally believe this story to be true, but that's just me. No judgment here either way. You do you. But if this is the reason for Easter, then what is with the association with rabbits? Where do they come in? What about the Easter Bunny specifically? I made a theory last year that I think may be the true reason for the connection. Now don't worry, after this longer video, I will not make you watch another one. Instead, I'll just recap the theory right now as an Easter gift. According to Wikipedia, the Easter Bunny, or Easter Hare, originated amongst German Lutherans and was brought over to America when some Germans immigrated over here. The rabbit would hop around with a basket of colored eggs, candy, and small toys, giving said trinkets to those he determined to be good at the start of the season of Eastertide, which is the festal season in the liturgical year of Christianity that focuses on celebrating the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Well, the rabbit is a symbol of the resurrection of Christ in Christianity because in spring, the rabbit rises out of its burrow like how Jesus rose from the dead. That, mixed with how, in the pagan beliefs, the rabbit was a symbol of fertility and how the Easter Bunny lays eggs, thus producing new life, like how Jesus came back with new life, it makes sense that the church would commandeer the Easter Bunny and market it as a figurehead of the church, along with other mythical creatures like Santa Claus and St. Patrick. The Easter Bunny relates directly to Jesus, though, which can only mean one thing. The Easter Bunny is Jesus's church-sanctioned fursona. And with that, thank you all for watching. Let me know if this style of video is something you like, and maybe I can do more in the future, or just read cryptid stories or something. But leave your thoughts and theories in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.